IB Nation, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Y'all know who I am. I'm Brian Driscoll, but some of you might not recognize that guy. That's Bill Bender, and if you don't know him, it means you have not watched the CFB Nation channel, because that is not only the lead college football writer at Sporting News, Bill Bender, who I have one of the very, very few people whose content I actually read and enjoy, but also he's a co-host of the CFB All-America show that he does with Bill Trocchi, who is an editor at Sporting News and someone who has worked at Rivals and other places. And so, Bill, I wanted to get you on today to talk a little Notre Dame football, a little top 25, man. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it. I'm rocking my St. Catherine green and gold, as you mentioned. We had a busy weekend with those kids this weekend. I tell you what, a lot of future, maybe couple future Golden Domers out there running 7-on-7 and lacrosse. And I'll tell you what, the third and fourth grade St. Catherine's girls lacrosse team is not to be trifled with. They are very good, very well-run program over there.
So for those of you who don't know, Bill and I actually have probably lately more conversations about his lacrosse. He's a head coach of a lacrosse team than we do maybe about college football. So,
well, I've been paying attention. I'm going to be honest with you, Brian. This spring, I've probably watched more game film of the Notre Dame lacrosse team to learn some things, and you can learn from the Kavanaugh brothers for sure.
That's right,
and learn from their very good goalie. And I didn't hear any ACC chants at the lacrosse tournament last week, but man, what a well-represented Virginia, Notre Dame, Duke, leaving the only Big Ten team, and you know I'm Mr. Big Ten Homer, Penn State. So good to see that lacrosse is coming to this part of the country. We very much enjoy it.
It is, and Notre Dame has been continuing to grow. They've had some very good teams, and obviously now are they still in the Final Four? That they played Virginia in the semis, right?
They play this week. So
that's been their Achilles heel this year, Bill. I've had to beat them so far.
I have a full breakdown at Sporting News. I actually do a little college lacrosse writing now among the many things that I do. And today we had a Michael Jordan LeBron piece that people are totally agreeing with, as you can imagine. But
I read that and I was like, oh, this is not going to go well.
But
in either direction, the LeBron people are going to hate it. The Jordan people are going to hate it. It just is what it is.
I think at Irish Breakdown, you could probably appreciate this, Brian. When you write something that makes both sides mad, you've probably done your job.
Yep. I've found my sweet spot, no doubt. Well, Bill, we're bringing you on here today because I wanted to have a conversation with you about Notre Dame. And look, we're going to spend all summer, we go live every single day. We're going to spend all summer breaking Notre Dame. People are going to absolutely know what my opinion of this football team is. I wanted to bring you on today for really two different reasons. The primary reason is because when I read your top 25 list, I was like, yep, we're going to have to have a conversation about this. But also, I also want to get your opinion on Notre Dame, because I think it's very important for people to have a very good objective view of outsiders. Because on this show, Bill, I've spent a lot of time just tearing apart just the ridiculousness of what is the ESPN rankings and pretty much everything that they do. Recruiting rankings are getting worse and worse and worse. And then On3 just has some bizarreness. For example, On3 believes that Iowa, Minnesota, and Missouri have more four-star or better players on their roster than Notre Dame does. Okay, so I haven't got into that one yet. But you're a very objective person, and I wanted to give Notre Dame fans that there is hope, that there are people out there that have an objective, honest view of Notre Dame, whether you agree with it or not. And that's why I wanted to bring Bill on. And, of course, you have plenty of Notre Dame fans around you. Obviously, Jack Frencho is in the chat. He's talking, obviously. Billy is the best. He's absolutely right. So you're not an anti-Notre Dame guy, and you kind of joke about your Big Ten homer thing, but I think it's going to be a fun conversation.
No, yeah, and Jack's son is one of my son's friends, and they were on that 7-on-7 team this weekend. So I talk a lot of Ohio State, a lot of Michigan, and a lot of Notre Dame, because that's what I've grown up around. And I you know what, Brian, I'm going to start with a question for you. I mean, obviously we have Notre Dame number 10 in our top 25. Where would you have them, first of all? Like I would like, what would your speculative ranking of Notre Dame be?
So I have not done an official top 25 from the standpoint of breaking everybody down. However, of what I've looked at and what I've glanced, I kind of have a range, Bill, of like 8 to 11. I think you could make a case for them being as high as 8 because there's some teams that I think have some greater questions even than Notre Dame has ahead of them. I'm not the believer in Joe Milton, for example, that some people believe that he is. But I also am not someone who's going to pound on the table and say absolutely it should be as high as 8 because this is still a team that has to prove that they can beat the Marshalls and the Stanfords on a consistent basis. So, I think we saw last year that Notre Dame can be competitive against the big three. We saw it. They were in each one of those games. The USC game was probably the least competitive of the three, simply because Notre Dame would like make it a score and then USC would go back and put points on the board. Notre Dame would make it a score game. Then USC would go down and put points on the board. You never really felt like Notre Dame was going to win that one, but it was at least competitive. They had a lead against Ohio State for much of the game. They actually led more in that game than Ohio State did. And then, of course, they dominated Clemson. It's can Coach Freeman get this team to where, okay, let's say they go on the road and beat Ohio State on the September 23rd. Can then they follow that up the next week and beat Duke? Right. And that's a question mark that you have to have about this football team until you see them do it. Now, the reason I would have them probably, 9 to 10, and I'm comfortable with the 10 ranking is because I do think that some of the things that held that football team back have been rectified this season with certain, grad transfers, but also younger players stepping up. Some coaching changes are going to result. Well, actually, I should say coaching changes because they might have happened anyway, but some coaching changes are going to kind of build around some of what we perceive to be the new strengths of the football team, like the wide receiver position, things along those lines. So I'm comfortable anywhere 8 to 11. What I've had an issue with, Bill, is not so much where Notre Dame is placed, but why some teams don't seem to be being held to the same standard that they're holding Notre Dame to. That's sort of the issue that I come down to with certain teams about it. But I mean, if you've got Notre Dame anywhere from 10 to 13, I'm probably not going to have a big issue with that, especially for a preseason poll.
Well, yeah, and I separated this top 25, and it's probably going to hold into August. I'm going to look at it as like 3 tiers, right? The first tier would be that top 4 that is going to be across the board. When you see bowl projections, it's going to be what? Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, in either order, Ohio State. And then there's that second 4, LSU, USC, Penn State, Washington. I kind of call them the trendy picks. A lot of people have Washington going to the playoff because of Michael Penix.
Yeah.
And they like their schedule. USC with Caleb Williams. Pac-12 has some good teams. And then Notre Dame falls into that next 4. If we were doing a 12-team playoff, this would be fantastic, by the way, where you have Florida State, Tennessee, Notre Dame. And then technically we have Oregon next, but I would probably take a leap because I do this with you every year and put Texas next.
Sure.
So I think putting Notre Dame with Sam Hartman in between a Florida State team that there's a lot of hype around, ton of hype around Jordan Travis. We both like Jordan Travis, and a lot of hype around Tennessee because the big question mark is, can Joe Milton be Hendon Hooker Part 2 and keep that offense going?
Without his top 2 weapons that he had to throw to.
Without Hyatt and Tillman. And without your left tackle, and without, a lot of things that went to the NFL. So I think Notre Dame falls in that number 10. And when I break them down, and you kind of touched on it, their schedule is what it is. But to me, and Clemson, I know they beat them. They've got to do it again. But where is this program when they play Ohio State? And where is this program when they play USC?
Right. And that's what's going to determine whether or not they deserve to be in that conversation. I mean, that's something I think all Notre Dame fans agree on. Like, this program is trending in the right direction. I think most of us believe that. But if you want to take that next step, it was the same complaint that you had with Brian Kelly, is can you win the big games? Clemson was a big game last year, but they were not on the same level as Ohio State was last year. They're not on the same level that they were in 2019 and 2018 and even 2020, as we saw when Notre Dame got to play a depleted Clemson team. It took them 2 overtimes to beat them. When they played Clemson healthy a month later, they got manhandled. I mean, that's the thing, is you have to start winning those big games when you need to be in there. So I actually have made the argument on this show, Bill, that I actually believe Notre Dame has a top 5 roster. But whether or not you have a top 5 roster does not mean you deserve to be ranked in the top 25, because rosters don't equal wins. Texas A&M did not have a 5-7 roster last year, but they were clearly a 5-7 football team. So that's why I'm comfortable with sort of that 8 to 11 is probably where I would say is my sweet spot. I think the Washington one is interesting, and we should actually do this on either this show or the other show. We should have a preseason top 25 discussion, because that could be we could do a whole show on that, because I would love to have a Penn State conversation, because I'm still waiting on Penn State to actually beat someone good to earn their borderline top 5 team reputation. And that's would be kind of my beef with Penn State at this point in time.
What I do with Notre Dame too, and it's part of it is where I live and where I'm situated in Central Ohio, is I typically, my brain will compare Notre Dame to Ohio State, Michigan, and then Penn State. Those are the 4 major programs from basically across the Ohio River. So where are you at compared to Penn State? If roster-wise comparable, Penn State really likes their quarterback going into this year. They like the running backs. They're coming off a Rose Bowl victory. But to your point, James Franklin, I point this out every day, 4-14 against Ohio State and Michigan. If Notre Dame played Ohio State and Michigan every year for 9 years, would they be 4-14? I mean, that's something to consider.
And it would look a lot like Penn State's record. Most of their wins would be against Michigan.
Right.
That's where Penn State's like 1 in 16.
That's
right,
it.
is the only game that they won. And they've had a couple, and even the Michigan teams they beat, I think only one of those Michigan teams was any good. I mean, the other year's 8-5. It was, I think, one year they beat them was the same year that Wisconsin beat them by 21. They weren't great Michigan teams.
Michigan's roster is comparable to Notre Dame, though. I would argue that as well.
I'm comfortable with Michigan being where they are, because Michigan's getting the job. Now, look, here's the thing about Michigan, for example. I would say Michigan hasn't beaten a whole lot of people yet, but they have the 2 wins over Ohio State.
Right.
That matters. And they're 2-0 against Penn State. So we can argue that people say, oh, Michigan's overrated. Okay, that's fine. You can say that, but the fact of the matter is they're beating the teams that Notre Dame can't say that they've beaten. So until Notre Dame wins those games, you can't say, hey, we deserve to be ranked ahead of Michigan. Penn State, for me, I'm fine being ranked ahead of Notre Dame. It's with Penn State and LSU, it's the assumption that they are automatically in that top 5 conversation. It's really more of what my discussion is. And
they're not.
The assumption that LSU should be ranked ahead of Florida State is another one that I have a problem with, because they both have bad losses. They both have very good wins last year, and Florida State won the head-to-head.
Well, and Florida State brought in another receiver in Keon Coleman, and they're like, I was talking.
Who's going to be the small receiver, by the way, of the 2 outside guys?
The one that doesn't average the one that doesn't average 20 yards per catch.
Right.
The more I think about them, and hindsight's always 20/20 when you do these lists, is, and you and I were talking about it before we came on. Jordan Travis is really good, and he's Heisman sleeper good. And to give him 2 receivers, a running game, a creative offensive coach, I mean, they're going to be very, very good this year. So I think they're a team I'm definitely got my eye on, and they're probably more worthy of that discussion because of the ACC too. Like, who are you picking to win the ACC, Clemson or Florida State?
That's going to be a great because I actually like the direction Clemson is going. I think that they've been fading back. I think the hire of Garrett Riley, I think Garrett Riley is getting a little bit too much. He's the best hire of the offseason. I'm not one of those people that believes that, but it's kind of like Sam Hartman at quarterback. Even if you think Sam Hartman's just a solid college quarterback, you have to be able to admit it's still a significant upgrade over what they had. And that's kind of how I feel about Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik together. I don't think Garrett Riley is Lincoln. He's got a lot to prove for that. I think he benefited from working for a great offensive mind in Sonny Dykes, which is a good thing. He's not going to just step in there and he's going to do for Clemson what Lincoln did for Oklahoma, because Lincoln, to me, was a little bit more established. He was his own OC at East Carolina and those type of things. But I do think it's going to be so much better than what it was under Brandon Streeter and Tony Elliott. And I think the quarterback situation is going to be a lot better as well. And, Clemson's a quarterback disaster away from being in the college football playoff last year.
Right.
If their quarterback doesn't just completely collapse against South Carolina in a game they had a 2-touchdown lead, they're a playoff team again last year.
Well, they should have – another hindsight 2020 is they should have just rolled with Klubnik after the Syracuse game. And I don't know if that makes Notre Dame different. It probably doesn't. But it might be enough to get by South Carolina, win the ACC championship, and slip into the college football playoff. So it is a very critical year for Clemson in a lot of ways.
And I think at the very least, they should have made the move after the Notre Dame game. After you caught that loss against Notre Dame and he threw some bad picks and all that, I thought that was the time to make that move. I mean, it's hard to bench a guy when you're winning. He's done it before. He did it with Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence, but Cade Klubnik's not Trevor Lawrence. So I do get that. But this whole conversation, Bill, leads me back to why I have a lot of excitement about Notre Dame, and I want to kind of get your thoughts, and we'll dive into the Notre Dame conversation now, is because even though we all view Georgia, I'm a believer, Bill, and people on this channel know this. When it comes to top 25s, I don't care if Georgia lost 22 starters from last year's team. You're the champ until somebody beats you. I'm a big believer in that, especially when you recruit the way that they do. We can have a conversation about, are they going to be as good as they were the last 2 years? That's debatable. In some areas they will be, in some areas they won't be. I don't think Bama's a typical Bama team. I don't even think this Ohio State team is what they've been the last couple of years. They all have major question marks. Some will get answered, some won't. That's just college football. The thing I am excited about with this season from a college football standpoint and from a Notre Dame standpoint is there are no-brainer. The top four to me is a no-brainer. I'm comfortable with that. But what I would say is those teams are not no-brainers, like nobody can touch them. I won't be shocked if Penn State wins the Big Ten this year. And I'm not a Penn State guy. It's just the gap is narrowing this year because of quarterback losses, heavy NFL departures, and all types of different things. And that's where I think a lot of excitement for Notre Dame is because how often is it that Notre Dame goes into a season where you're like, hey, we know we're going to be pretty good at quarterback when you're looking at it from a Notre Dame fan standpoint, and there's major question marks at Georgia, Bama, Ohio State at quarterback, Clemson at quarterback. And I think that's where it really begins with
with the three, that, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. That's where I make jokes with my buddies all the time. I said, I like wake me up when one of them loses. Georgia's schedule is set up that they will be 10-0, and Carson Beck should be able to settle in there as quarterback. So they're, of those three, they probably have the least concern because of the roster he's bringing back. Alabama,
and they don't need offense as much as the other teams do need offense to win. Correct.
Ohio State's entire system is based on the quarterback getting the ball out to these talented receivers, Harrison, Igbuka. They've got a lot of frontline first-round talent, if you read mock drafts. Do they have the defense that there's something, and I talk about this all the time being around here, Michigan figured something out. Michigan's figured them out a little bit, and that hasn't happened in 20 years, where you go into that matchup thinking, who's a better coach right now? I don't think Michigan had the advantage there since Carr and Cooper. That's going way back.
Yeah.
So that's
even 2011 when it was Hoke and Fickle. It's like, well,
and you flip a coin on that one.
Right.
Now it's not a coin flip because what Luke's been able to accomplish. But yeah, and then you get into the Alabama. It's so strange to say this sentence out loud that the guy that didn't win the Notre Dame quarterback job might start for Alabama in week 1. With Notre Dame's former offensive coordinator. I'm sure you guys have gone down wormholes on Irish Breakdown about that. I'm sure maybe one or two. But they still have a ton of talent, though.
Right.
And they still have Nick Saban, and they still have a schedule set up where I'm like, is Alabama going to beat LSU at home? I was not to keep reverting back to life, but I told my kids at lacrosse one night, I was like, there's a reason why Alabama's only lost 4 home games since 2010. Because it's their approach, the way they play at home. And 3 of those 4 losses were to Heisman caliber quarterbacks in Manziel and Cam, not Heisman caliber, the guys won it, Burrow. So they're still going to be a tough out. I think reports of Alabama's demise are pretty greatly exaggerated.
So Bill, you had Notre Dame in your number 13 spot in your immediate postseason top 25, the way too early top 25, which I think are fun, especially when you label it properly as it's a way too early top 25. You jumped them up to 10 post-spring. So let's just kind of first begin with big picture view of where you see this Notre Dame program right now, even not so much the specifics of the 2023 team, which we'll get into, but first of all, what direction do you think Notre Dame is trending? Because this can be debated, Bill, because people can say, hey, look, they were a 10-plus win team year after year after year. Freeman comes in, they're 9-4. NIL means they can't do this, and transfer portal means they can't do that, all these other kind of things. What's your, first of all, big picture sky in the, eye in the sky type of view of the Notre Dame program.
Well, I mean, you go back to last year, they did the Lou Holtz thing where they let Ohio State beat them twice. And that was a tough hole to dig. And they almost let them beat them 3 times, which would have been a disaster. But I thought Marcus did a nice job of recovering, keeping the momentum on the recruiting trail. And then closing the season, I have mixed reaction about bowl games, but I mean, that was a high level game against an SEC team that is on the upward swing with Shane Beamer. So for them to beat Clemson, that was probably the most eye-opening win. But again, I evaluate this program on something I had to look up before I came on. I look at the Ohio State and USC games. So what that comes down to me is no turnovers in those games. They didn't force a turnover. They got 3 sacks. There wasn't enough pressure in those games. So what are the 4- and 5-star defensive guys? Is Marcus Freeman going to be a difference maker on that end in the long term? So, I mean, big picture, yeah, this program is a top 10 program. And Marcus Freeman, we're doing our coach rankings this week, by the way. He'll be in that 25 to 30 range for now.
That's got to be challenging this year because there's been so much coaching turnover the last 3-4 years. I mean, guys that were on that list for years are gone now. I mean, even a guy like Dan Mullen, who could debate where he was. Not that long ago, he was considered a top 10 coach, and now he's sitting in a TV studio, breaking down games. There's been so much turnover. It's got to be interesting and to kind of put those lists together. Where back in the day, you could just kind of, here's your top 5, just roll that out, and then we'll figure out what's going on with everybody else. No Gary Patterson anymore. I mean, there's just been so much turnover last week.
Well, and I rank all 133. I have a spreadsheet. I have a system. My system kind of looks at their overall accomplishments, what they've done over 3 years, what they've done at their current school, and then a little like kind of just you and I were sitting at the bar and I'm taking this guy over this guy, and here's why. And, like I said, Marcus will probably end up in that 25 to 30 range, which considering first year is probably about right. And then if you do it over the next couple of years, it's the hardest part about doing that, honestly, is where do you put Pat Fitzgerald versus where do you put a guy like PJ Fleck who wins 9 games at Minnesota, and you kind of look at it and you're like,
it's an ugly 9 wins.
It's ugly,
yeah,
but he's still winning at a place that I don't think of Minnesota as a 9 to 10 kind of win program. But, to answer Notre Dame, yeah, I mean, they come into this season with top 10 expectations. They could get into the playoff. That's the best case scenario. They've got 3 huge red letter, circle red marker games where you circle the game. And it's going to be a lot of fun finding out. I'm really selfishly, because again of my background, looking forward to the big game against Ohio State, Notre Dame. Not as much talk around Ohio about that one yet as there was last year, because I think it had been so long, but the comeback game ought to be pretty fun.
Let me ask you this question, Bill. What did the way that Notre Dame bounced back from what to me was one of the worst losses they've had in a long time? I mean, like, people will say the Marshall loss was not worse than Stanford. Well, they're a group of 5 team. Yeah, they were a 9-10 win team, caliber team at that group of 5. They're a good football team, and they've got guys transferring from big-time schools, and now they've got guys going to big-time schools. Some that had legit NFL players in the secondary last year. Not excusable to lose to Marshall. Don't get me wrong. Stanford was terrible. They hadn't beaten a Power 5 or an FBS team in over a calendar year when they beat Notre Dame. Their only win up to that point in time in the season was over Colgate. That was an inexcusable win, and the kind of win that can completely destroy a coach before he even gets started, in my opinion.
Right.
What did you learn about this football team and about Marcus Freeman, if anything? A little bit of a leading question from the way that they responded from that, with winning 5 of 6, and then with the one loss being a loss to USC, who finished the year in the top 10.
Yeah, it could have been a total disaster. But, I mean, Drew Pine, the work that they did there and his accuracy. Then they got going and they found an identity running the football, which was, remember, one game, you know how in this business, I joke a lot. There's moments in a season where I like to joke because I'm wrong enough that, like, when I'm really right about something, I'm really excited about it. I knew they were going to hammer Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that game. I was like, they're going to run it down their throat. They're going to win that game by a lot. And I don't think Syracuse has it. And that one I was right about. And I thought the USC game might have been a little more competitive. Could have been. But that's where this game is, because when you have a guy like Caleb Williams out there, he can do things that make a difference. And that's kind of leads into this season, Brian, where if you ask me what's the biggest reason you bump Notre Dame from 13 to 10, I think it's the Sam Hartman factor, getting him in there and seeing what he can do, you had the numbers on this better than me, but can he push the ball down the field with these receivers? Right. How much does he change the complexion of the Notre Dame offense? And if you look what he did at Wake Forest the last couple of years and really look at that Clemson game from last year, he could do that.
I think that's the interesting thing when we look at this team, Bill, and we transition into focusing on the 23 team specifically, is how you view Notre Dame has to begin with the impact that you think they are going to have or not have with Sam Hartman. Because you can talk about Drew Pine being accurate, and he was. I mean, he had a very high quarterback rating. He had a high completion percentage, but he just made no big throws, really. And that was the problem. And, the Clemson game, for example, they beat Clemson 35-14 because of the run game and the defense and special teams all stepped up to make big plays, and they didn't have to rely on the quarterback to win. But when you're playing Ohio State, they didn't have a quarterback that can make the plays, and the offensive line wasn't there yet. But it really came down to when you played USC, is USC's quarterback was doing Hercules stuff, doing Superman stuff to win that game, and Notre Dame didn't have the ability to do that. Is Sam Hartman, how do you view him? Do you view him as being because this is what I see when I look at the national rankings, or what I perceive people to be saying, is basically the people that are very high on Sam Hartman will say, look what this guy did at Wake Forest. I mean, Wake Forest, he put these numbers up. At Wake Forest, he led them to 19 wins the last 2 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The people that aren't high on Sam Hartman will say, well, it's because the slow mesh option, which I think a lot of people have a very fundamental misunderstanding of what the slow mesh is and how it impacts the pass game, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Where do you fall in line in regard to, forget the quarterback rankings part of it, because if you're a top 10 quarterback, you're a good quarterback. We'll get into that later. How do you think that move impacts this team when it comes to what the ceiling of what this team could be in 2023? And what do you think that ceiling is in 2023?
Well, I think it makes them a playoff team. It really, Ian Book did that. Ian Book did that with high level efficient play. And I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but I'm not sure Ian Book pushed the ball down the field better than Sam Hartman.
Not even close. His best year was 2019 with Cole Kmet and Chase Claypool. And I think that year Ian threw the ball maybe about 60 times. I'm going to look it up.
Right.
He had deep throws, so that's throws of 20 or more. He had 63 was the most he ever had. Sam Hartman's been over 90 each of the last 2 years.
Right. And if he's spinning it like that, and we all read Pro Football Focus a little bit differently. The way I look at it is kind of my just very elementary view of college football quarterback play. If I was doing a checklist of what I want a completion percentage of 65 or better. I want a guy that can push it down the field, not just in 0 to 10 yard passes. And as Pro Football Focus told me this morning, I didn't realize this. Sam Hartman, 30 touchdown passes of 10 yards or more, 16 of 20 yards or more, 10 interceptions, which you can live with, because when you push the ball down the field, a college quarterback will make more mistakes than the NFL guy, especially when you're playing for Wake Forest. And, slow mesh or not, there are things in that you would have to explain to me, honestly, like watching but in general, the ability to do those things makes him very enticing for Notre Dame. When you look at the receiver talent that they have, you're going to have to tell me a little bit more about Jaden Greathouse and if he's going to be on the field to be one of those guys. The ceiling's playoff. The floor is last year, another 9-4, 8-5 season where they lose to USC.
Explain why you think that's the floor again, because I agree with you. I mean, the floor to me, it's because you've got to you kind of feel like Brian Kelly had a couple down years and he was able to get him back on track the next year. He's at least just proven that with Marcus Freeman. There's no track record of what are you going to do in year 2. Is that the reason for your floor? Is basically the unknown of we're still learning a lot about Marcus Freeman, or is it the schedule? What are the reasons that you say the floor could be another repeat of a 9-4 season? Which
because of the
I don't think will
schedule.
happen, but I don't think it's unreasonable to discuss.
Well, the schedule, like, okay, the floor is you lose to Ohio State again, you lose to USC again, you lose to Clemson again, and you find one of those games that happened last year that you're like, how did they lose that game? That's how you lose that, and you end up 8-4, catch a bad bowl game beat. You never know the bowl game matchup, who it could be. Typically with Notre Dame, it's probably going to be an SEC or Big Ten school. Well, not a Big Ten school. They don't do that enough. But you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the way to go to 8-5. So that, that's pretty much my floor ceiling for, honestly, Michigan, Penn State. It's never it's not Ohio State's floor. Ohio State's floor is 10 because of their schedule, because they don't lose at home, because they can have last year's game against Northwestern is a great example of that I think one subtle difference between Ohio State and Notre Dame right now. Ohio State played objectively terrible against Northwestern in horrible wind and still won by what they won by, and their fans were all upset about it. And when you're to the point as a program, when you win by 20 or whatever, and you're angry about it, then you know that I call it spoiled, but in the end of the day, those are the college football playoff contenders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And then completion percentage, I like the point that you made, because when you look at, for example, using Pro Football Focus, and you look at for example, last year they had C.J. Stroud at 65.3% last year, throwing the ball, or as far as overall completion percentage, because they actually look at it, Bill, they actually do their own they take out like throwaways and batted passes and things along those lines. They had Sam Hartman at 62.8% completion percentage, but it's that ability to throw the ball down the field, because if there is a criticism, in my opinion, of the Ohio State offense, it's that they don't, to me, with the talent they have, they don't push the ball down the field enough. That's one of the criticisms I have, and I think it hurts them in some of the big games when maybe they need to do that and they haven't been doing it enough. But then you look at Sam Hartman and kind of what he did, and he's throwing the ball. See, we got C.J. Stroud here. So that's Sam Hartman. I'm just going to pull up the numbers just to kind of back up the conversation, because I like using numbers, and we've already brought up Pro Football Focus. So if you look at C.J. Stroud last year, for example, he attempted 61 deep balls, completed 31 of them. Just good. I mean, if you're completing 50% or better on deep balls, you're pretty good. That's something Trevor Lawrence never did. Sam Hartman last year completed 41 of 93 deep balls for 44.1%. So obviously CJ Stroud's going to have a higher completion percentage, and he did at 65.9 compared to 62.8 for Sam Hartman. And then you look at where are they in the medium, that's 10 medium area, which is 10 to 19 yards past line of scrimmage, and then short 0 to 9. And if you look at CJ Stroud, for example, his completion percentage 10 to 19 was 56.0. Sam Hartman's was 59.8. If you look at CJ Stroud 0 to 9, it was 77.7, and Sam Hartman was 77.3. So that's going to be the difference between your completion percentages. They're actually, Sam Hartman is slightly ahead, under 20, and CJ Stroud is ahead over 20, partly because he's thrown to the best receiving core in college football, but also the volume of it, right? I mean, when you throw 30 more times down the field, you're going to naturally have a lower completion percentage. I don't think Notre Dame's going to throw 90 plus times down the field this year, although I won't have a problem with it.
No, and the best, see a lot more. The best of CJ Stroud was the Georgia game, where he was hammering it down the field to Harrison and Abuka, and then for whatever reason they didn't do it at the end of the game. But the reason being Harrison was out. But yeah, and that's two different things. And obviously with Hartman, he was throwing to A.T. Perry, who was drafted. I saw that in the comments. Who was he throwing? Consider who they were throwing to. A.T. Perry is probably their best receiver. But if you put A.T. Perry in Notre Dame, he's probably just the vertical guy, right? You know,
I'm a big A.T. Perry fan. I think the comment was more about C.J. Stroud, who C.J. was throwing to.
Well, he threw to some good ones.
Right.
Yeah, so
Wake Forest, I think, is a very underrated receiving core. Donovan Green, the Banks kid was really good. Yep. Taylor Morin's a good player. But I think some of it, too, is, and this is the issue that I have with the ESPN ranking, and he was talking about how he's not going to have good players in Notre Dame. And I was like, well, you don't know that. I mean, who they're throwing to matters. Go watch the Clemson game from this past year. Some of the throws that Sam Hartman was making that throw were just unreal. I mean, he was just unconscious that game. So I think that factors into it. But the fact that we're even having this conversation where we're even saying, well, Notre Dame's quarterback situation, how was it compared to Ohio State, to me is partly why I think there's a lot of excitement for Notre Dame, because he's not competing against C.J. Stroud this year. He's not competing against Bryce Young this year. He's not competing against Stetson Bennett, who I have very strong opinions of Stetson Bennett, but the fact is he ran that offense well, and he stepped up in big moments. But he's not competing against a guy that's got 2 titles under his belt anymore. He's competing against guys that we don't know about. They are now where Notre Dame has been so many times in recent years, with just uncertainty at the quarterback position. There's a level of Ohio State's going to be fine numbers-wise this year at quarterback. Whoever the quarterback is going to put up numbers. He's going to have over 4,000 yards off passing, most likely, at least 3,800, because I think Ohio State will and should run the ball a little bit more this year. But it's kind of who they're competing with, and I think that's the interesting aspect to this that you're getting to, and that we're having, is like the quarterback thing should change things a little bit, but there's still a lot of unknowns around him. That whereas you look at Kyle McCord, for example, I don't know what Kyle McCord's going to be, but I know what Marvin Harrison's going to be. Right. I know what Emeka's going to be. I know what Kate Stover's going to be, and if the running backs are healthy, I know what they're going to be. And I think that's the balance that you have to have here if you're being objective when you're having a conversation about Notre Dame. And could Notre Dame be a playoff team? Yes. Should we sit here and say right now, Bill, if you think that, you need to put them in the top 4 of your rankings? No,
not yet.
No.
I mean,
prove some things first.
10-2 is realistic.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably that means they lose to Ohio State, which they have to go. To me, they have to go out and prove they can beat Ohio State. That's why. Well, I would ask. I mean, I can ask your comments section because I'm allowed.
You can
to do
ask
that.
me or them, whatever you want.
I can ask the comments section.
This is the fun thing about this.
I'll ask
having
you.
A discussion. We're having a conversation.
I'll ask you, and then I'll ask them. Is I'm guessing that most Notre Dame fans, if you were given a choice this year, said you're going to beat Ohio State or USC. I think you're taking Ohio State.
Most will, yeah. We've actually had this conversation before.
Right.
Because and Ryan and I had this conversation on the show one time, and it comes down to this, Bill, is we know Notre Dame can beat USC. They've dominated that series the last 10 years. And, after this year, USC won't have Caleb Williams anymore. You have to and I don't think beating USC is the kind of statement win that Notre Dame needs, in my opinion. The statement win is not Clemson anymore either, because it's only a statement win with Clemson if you'd have beat them with Trevor or Deshaun, which they were close doing twice, somewhat close. So the first time it was close for a little bit. The second time was close for a little bit. The first time they have a chance to tie the game up with 2 seconds left on the clock. So, but you didn't get those done. You have to go show that you can beat that elite team that's perceived as elite. And the last time Notre Dame has done that, honestly, it's 2012 when they beat Stanford, when Stanford was that team. I mean, they were a team that you looked at and said, boy, this is a dominant program. I mean, and that's what Stanford was back then. They haven't won a game like that in a long time. And you could say Clemson in 2020, but again, I point to, you have to be intellectually honest and say, do they win that game and that they need a double overtime to win if they have Trevor Lawrence and Mike Jones and Tyler Davis and James Skalski? I don't know. Who knows? We don't know, but evidence would show that they wouldn't have, because they had a chance to beat them with those guys and they couldn't get it done.
The 2 biggest chances for a seismic overreaction in September. That's one. Mm-hmm. If Notre Dame beats Ohio State, it will ripple all across not just the Midwest, but across the country, because the panic on Ryan Day would be off the charts because of what happened with Michigan. And there's a little bit of Urban won the big game. He hasn't won it yet, because Urban was, for all the things Urban Meyer was and is, he's money in big games.
Yeah.
I mean, 7-0
he was at Ohio State and Florida what Lou Holtz was at Notre Dame.
Yeah,
Lou Holtz would go lose to an unranked Stanford team, but then beat Penn State on the road, or beat Miami, beat Michigan, beat Florida State, or whatever. I mean, it just absolutely how it was.
And the other is week 2, if Texas beats Alabama, I'm just going to be on a 24-hour shift that day probably because it's going to be Saban's done. Sark should coach Alabama. Texas is back. Quinn Ewers for Heisman. Everything that could come on. And now I'm going to be honest with you, it could happen.
Yes.
It could. It could. I don't know that it will, but it could.
Can I throw another one in there? I know
Sure.
it happened a year ago, but I don't think a lot of people remember it because we live in this very much this society of September doesn't matter by November, which I despise. But because it was Brian Kelly's first game and they beat Bama and all, I don't think enough credit was put on that win that Florida State had over LSU last year.
Right.
I think there's still some people that like Florida State, but there's the perception, because perception matters in these conversations, Bill, right? The perception of LSU last year was not what it is now. It was they have to overhaul the roster. They only had 30 players coming back. We don't know how good they're going to be. Bama's still the best team in the West. Well, they won the SEC West last year. They beat Bama. So now I think that a win over that could not only validate Florida State, but I think it could also, you have to start having a different conversation about the ACC now. It's not just Clemson and everybody else now. It's now Clemson and Florida State. Now, that may not end up proving to be true by the season's end, but I do think that's an overreaction that I think we'll have in September as well. I'm going to throw that as the third
That's
game.
a good one because it's the best week one matchup. And I remember watching last year's matchup, and the last 8 to 9 minutes of game time was absolute. I call it, when I text buddies and, I'll say this game is nonsense right now. And it was absolute nonsense what was going on all the way down to the finish. So that's another good one because of the Florida State hype we've talked about, because of LSU and BK. And there are some analysts that are going to peg LSU to win the SEC West here in about a month when we do all the media days. I could see that. And in order, I would say Texas winning would be 1, Notre Dame 2, and then Florida State 3. Because, again, this Notre Dame-Ohio State dynamic. And we didn't – I wanted to ask you this too, because we talk so much about Hartman. Would you take Hartman over J.J. McCarthy?
Oh, yeah. For Notre Dame's system, yes. For what Notre Dame needs.
Yeah.
Because it's about what you need. It's like if I'm Michigan, maybe not, because I don't know that Michigan wants to run the offense that would maximize Sam Hartman's skill set. And it's like I make a joke where, people, when I do recruiting rankings, I factor in where a guy's committed to. People say, why do you do that? I said, well, how would you have felt about Jimmy Clausen as a prospect if he would have committed to Navy?
Right. That's fair. And Michigan, I think they still – there's this like push and pull of when you look at Michigan's roster, do they have the best backfield in the country? Yes. With McCarthy / Donovan Edwards / Blake Corum, if Blake Corum's healthy, yeah, that's better than what everybody else has. But the catch is, who are their receivers? That's the one thing.
Exactly.
It's mystifying to me that Michigan has gone since 2005. They haven't had a first-round receiver. It was Braylon, and Braylon was amazing at Michigan, and that was part of that tradition that they had. And you can make the same case with Notre Dame. Who's the last just unbelievable receiver they've had?
Will Fuller. Chase Claypool in 2019.
That was pretty good.
Yeah,
and they've had tight ends.
Will Fuller had back-to-back dominant years. Michael Floyd had had 100 catches in 2011, but it hasn't been consistent because you go from Michael Floyd in 11, and then it's like 12, it's DeVaris Daniels, 13, it's DeVaris, or it's TJ Jones, 14, then Will Fuller breaks out, right? And then after him, it's like, okay, Miles was good, but not elite. You had the 1 year Chase Claypool. Then after that, your best receivers like Javon McKinley. Then it's Kevin Austin. So it's been inconsistent. Where Michigan back in the day, to your point, it was year after year. Okay, Ty Streets leaves, and the next guy steps in, and he does what he needs to do.
I think their last 1,000-yard receiver is Jeremy Gallen.
Yeah,
which is just wild to me. So that's the weakness there. They do third tight ends. They do develop tight ends well, but when it came to it, when they played TCU had the dudes on the perimeter. They had Darius Davis and Quentin Johnston, and they had a little more speed than Michigan. That was very eye-opening in some ways. And
here's the thing to answer your question, Bill, because that's kind of my thing with Michigan, though, is they needed J.J. McCarthy to go out there and win them that game because they didn't have Blake against TCU. They didn't have Blake Corum. They ripped off that 50-yard run at the beginning of the game and then really couldn't run the football after that. Their 186 yards rushing is very misleading. There was 2 long scrambles on pass plays by J.J. McCarthy in that early 50-yard run. Other than that, they couldn't run the football on TCU. They needed J.J. McCarthy to put that team on his shoulders, and he made some big plays, but he also made 2 huge mistakes.
Huge mistake.
Costing that game. Now, in fairness, it was his first year as a starter. it was the first time they had really put that kind of pressure on him to go win them a game, which they hadn't really needed to do. They didn't need him to win the Ohio State game. It's like, hey, when we have this tight end running wide open down the field, don't miss.
Right.
And that's not to take away from him, but that's kind of when we get into the quarterback rankings. But I think that's something that it just depends on the team that you're trying to win with. If I'm Ohio State, who would I rather have, J.J. McCarthy or Sam Hartman? It's easily Sam Hartman. On most teams, my answer would be Sam Hartman.
Right.
On Notre Dame, it's Sam Hartman. On Michigan, I really feel like you need a quarterback that complements the running game and has to be able to do that not just with his arm, but also with his legs. And I think J.J. has tools that complement that well. Big arm, and he can run. And I think those are the things that you need to complement him. You just need to, like you said, you need to get him a little bit better perimeter weapons. And that's why they're going to need like a guy like Darius Clemens to break out this year as a guy that I liked a lot coming out of high school that I think could be that kind of guy for Michigan. Let's wrap up the Notre Dame conversation here, Bill, before we get to the top 25 quarterbacks. What is it that you like? We talked about Hartman, but when you look at this Notre Dame team, you say if Notre Dame does reach its potential, which you said is the potential of, because 11-1 this year has a pretty good shot at getting Notre Dame into the playoff, which Notre Dame has already smashed the myth of they have to go undefeated to be in the playoff. That's just not a thing because they've already done that. 11-1 minimum has a chance to get them in the playoff. If you got to beat the right teams, that 11-1 has to include a win over Ohio State, right?
Right.
So let's say 11-1 gets them into the playoff. What will be the things that you look at of this team right now that you say, I like this? It has either I like it now or it has potential, but if they're going to reach that, this group outside of Sam Hartman is going to be the reason why. What are the things you like about this team in that regard?
Running game in big games, being able to pound the rock in a big game and run the football when you need to. Not running like I said, I knew they were going to run over Syracuse. Can they run the ball against Ohio State? Can Estime be that guy that gets that going? I mean, obviously, you can average 6 yards a carry for a season, but those are the games that you look at. I mean, big offensive line, obviously. Alt, huge prospect. Yeah, we had him on our top 50 big board. And then I mentioned, who are the difference makers on the defensive side of the ball when you lose Foskey? I do like when your best returners are linebackers. I'm a fan of that. And they do have that, right, with Kaiser and Bertrand. But in those big games, who's disrupting things? Who's going to be the guy that quote unquote, mess things up for the other team? And Morrison in the secondary is nice. I don't want to not mention him, but that's where the game is, So I like those things about the defense. I still think, you need that one or two guys, especially in the running game. Who steps up a receiver? I still need you to tell me about Great House if he's going to work in. Coolsey, I like 20 yards a catch. I always like guys
leads you right in the next question. My next question was going to be, Bill, what are the concerns? So if they don't reach their potential, what would be the reasons why? And it sounds like you're starting to say that already you can talk all you want about potential, but an expression that I use all the time here, potential doesn't win you football games. Production does.
Right.
And potential doesn't equal production.
Which receiver steps up? Right. When they played Ohio State last year and I had bullseye seat for that game, Styles made the play right off the go, off a missed tackle and had the big pass play. And after that, they really didn't threaten Ohio State too much. And some of that was quarterback. Some of that was receiver. Some of that was O-line. Some of that was O-line. Some of it was Ohio State did a pretty good job on Mayer. All things considered, they did okay on him. So that, and then being able to run the ball in that game makes a difference. So I do judge a lot of Notre Dame off of Ohio State. I make no secret about that. But when I was watching that game, I was thinking, halftime, this is a game, but a couple things that Ohio State did to close it. I guess the other thing would be they ran like an entire quarter of that game off with their running game. And that's why it's such cliche old school football. But in the big games, I tend to favor the team that can run the ball when they have to, not run the ball to pad their statistics against like a MAC school.
Well, I mean, that's what the difference ultimately was, in my opinion, of the Ohio State-Georgia game. When Ohio State needed a tough yard, they couldn't get it. When Michigan needed a tough yard, they couldn't get it. How many times in Michigan to get stopped in 3rd and 4th down early in the game when they had a chance to really run TCU off the field?
Right.
They couldn't get those tough yards. TCU got those. TCU was the better running team that day, and that they won the game. I mean, TCU ran all over Michigan that game with their backup running back primarily. that's not a typical Michigan defensive experience. But like you said, when they won, when they needed to, they were able to get the tough yards. I still think football is very much about that. You don't even have to run for 250 yards, but when it's 3rd and 1 and you've got a game-winning drive and you have to throw the football, your odds of success are going to be less than when you can run, when the other team fears you can run the football. Because even then, if they're not afraid of you running the football, the threat of running the football, then your pass game's not going to be as effective because they're going to be prepared to play that more. I think those things still factor into it. So I agree with you on a lot of that, Bill. I think that it's going to be about the production. What I'm going to say to you is, if you want to know who that's going to be, number one, Jaden Greathouse. I'll answer your question. Jaden is a guy that will have a chance to play this year. I think him and Chris Tyree are going to end up getting a lot more time in the slot than maybe Notre Dame fans think that they will, because I think Jaden Thomas is going to play all over. I think Jaden Thomas is going to be that Swiss Army knife for Notre Dame. He's a guy that's going to be their most dependable pass catcher this year. You're going to see him get a lot of the routes that Michael Mayer got as a slot and an outside guy, not as a tight end. But Mayer did a lot as basically the boundary receiver. He did a lot as a slot guy. You're going to see Jaden Thomas get a lot of that type of stuff. But the name that keep an eye on, there's two words for you: Tobias Merriweather. Mm-hmm. So I think those are going to be guys. That's going to be a guy that Notre Dame is expecting to really be that breakout deep threat. Only caught one pass last year, went for a 41-yard touchdown. And then when they started working in the rotation, he got a concussion and it kept him out. But he's a guy that was their best receiver this spring. He was my highest ranked Notre Dame receiver commit since Michael Floyd back in 2008.
Good.
And that's how highly I thought of him coming out of Seattle. So I'm very, very high on him. He's got a lot to prove. But as we've seen in Notre Dame, Bill, a sophomore going from not much production to a lot of production is not abnormal. I mean, Equanimeous St. Brown went from one catch and 8 yards in 2015 to, I think it was like 59 for over almost 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns in 2016. Will Fuller and Golden Tate both had only 6 catches as freshmen. Then as sophomores, they both went over 1,000 yards, 10-plus touchdowns. So we've seen it before. Can Tobias be that kind of guy? We'll find out. I don't know if he's going to put up that kind of numbers because I think they're going to spread the ball around a lot more. One thing about Sam Hartman that you saw from his numbers is he spreads the ball around a lot. I mean, he's going to throw the ball to a lot of different guys. And so I think you're going to see that. And then, of course, Chris Tyree is going to be a key as well. They've got to find a way to get Chris Tyree the football in ways that his game is suited for. And that's something I thought last year's staff didn't do nearly as good of a job, good enough of a job with, was you've got this kid who's really fast. He's not a shake and bake guy. He's not a gap duo runner, which is what they tried to use him to do. He's a get the ball in space and get him a crease and let him go. Right. If they can get him involved in the pass game with the big receivers they have, I think that's where you start to see Notre Dame really have some productive weapons, because they're going to get production from the tight end, right? I mean,
right. Well, yeah.
It's not going to be Michael Mayer, but they're going to get production from the tight end position. It's can the outside guys step up and make the plays and force teams to defend them. And there's just going to be a lot of things that are going to go into that. But I think here's where I'm coming from, Bill, where my optimism is such. And again, this is as someone who watches Notre Dame more than anybody else, meaning more than I watch anybody else. Not that I watch more of Notre Dame than anybody else watches Notre Dame. I mean, I watch them more.
You watch more Notre Dame than anybody on the planet. Just say
it. Than I watch any other teams is what I'm saying.
Right.
If you watch the All-22, like we said this all year, Braden Lindsey should have been a 1,000-yard receiver last year. I mean, he was getting open against Ohio State. He was getting open against everybody. He just didn't have a quarterback to throw him the football. I mean, he should have had a 75-yard touchdown right before halftime against Marshall. He's 8 yards past the defense, and Tyler Buckner just missed him.
Right.
And then you go into the bowl game, and I was like, wait, where's this Braden Lindsey been? Like, Braden Lindsey's been there all year. The quarterbacks didn't throw him the football. If you go back and watch the film last year, the All-22, you'll see the Notre Dame receivers getting open a lot in the second half of the year. The ball just never came, partly because it was going to Michael Mayer, which you understand. And then the other part was you had a quarterback that just was unwilling to throw the ball down the field. And so I think that's one of the reasons for optimism that Notre Dame fans have that I think a lot of outsiders don't. And so I think your questions about the receiver position are very fair, Bill, because that's what you saw last year. You saw a team that beat Clemson 35-14 and threw for 86 yards.
Right.
You know, you saw a team that put up a lot of yards against USC throwing the football, but when they needed big plays and they needed to put drives together, they couldn't do it. They had turnovers. And I think that's going to be when they need. Ohio State said, "You're not running on us. If you're going to you're going to beat us. You're going to be throwing the football." And Notre Dame said, "Okay, sorry, we can't do that." I mean, that's really what it boils down to. They had Two big plays. Matt Salerno had the one catch, and Braden Lindsey had a nice diving catch, or three. And then the Braden Lindsey, the Lorenzo Styles big play. But 2-3 big plays aren't going to win you a game. You have to be able to make plays consistently, move the chains, and do those type of things. And they couldn't do it. And that's what they have to prove, because I can tell you till I'm blue in the face, Bill, that they've got all the potential in the world at receiver, and they do.
Right.
As I said, potential doesn't win you football games. Production does. And potential doesn't always equal production. And so I think those are fair things to have questions about.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
I'll say you wrap up what you want to say about Notre Dame, because we're going to go to the quarterback stuff next.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's pretty much it. I'm ready to talk quarterbacks if you want. We can get into that. I know you had a couple on there you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, well, I wanted to give you a chance, obviously, to talk about, because I do very much enjoy your work, Bill. I mean, that's the reason that we first started talking anyway, and that's why I now consider you a friend, is it was because I respected your work. And first time we talked, that was the conversation was about. You released a top 25 quarterback rankings, and I'll say this is something that I truly believe. I'm not just saying that because I like you and you host a show on my channel and because you're on here now. Even the stuff I didn't agree with, I like the fact that you at least made your case as to why you had certain guys in certain places. So I did enjoy that, and I'm going to put his story in the chat's description below so you guys can all look at it. So we'll get into the Sam Hartman part in a bit, but I do want to kind of talk about the rest of it. Number one, you had Caleb Williams number 1, Drake May number 2. I think that's a no-brainer. I think it's a no-brainer that those are the 1 and 2, and I also think there's a gap between 1 and 2. I think Drake May was an outstanding quarterback last year. I think the town around him, I have questions about this year, and then the new system. So there's enough question marks there that I say Caleb Williams is clearly number 1. Because I actually felt through the first 8-9 weeks of the season that Drake May would have got my Heisman vote through 8-9 games. The difference is Caleb Williams did things in November that Drake May didn't, and his team lost their last, 4 games of the season. And that's what separated it for me. Then after that, I think is where we could start having some conversations. You had Michael Penix number 3. That's where I have. So far we're good. Next, you get into a thing, and I got the impression from you, Bill, that it's kind of like, yeah, this is where I had to put somebody there. And even though I put this guy there, you could make a case somewhere else. So let's kind of get into the rest of your top 10 and get into kind of why you went Bo Nix 4, J.J. McCarthy 5, Jaden Daniels 6, Jordan Travis 7, Cameron Rising 8, Quinn Ewers 9, and Sam Hartman 10. I think 8 of those 10 I have in my top 10. We just would have them in different places. So let's kind of discuss a little bit, Bill. First of all, Bo Nix in that number 4 spot. What was your case for having Bo?
I mean, he had 44 total touchdowns. I will. So part of our methodology is Bill Trocchi, who I do the podcast with. I have him send me your top 25. Then I'd have mine. Then I average them out. And then I do the rule where and Bill's cool with it. I said, well, my name's on it. So I have some editorial liberties here that I'm going to take. I mean, we may have it like this, but you guys don't have to take the, from fans. So, I think Bo Nix is a solid 4. He could go either way. He's been on this list for 4 years, by the way. So
shouldn't have been, but yes, he has.
Yeah, a couple years he probably shouldn't have been. So, but I mean, you can't ignore the production. 44 touchdowns, less Bo Nix experience things like the head scratching interceptions. Made a lot of big plays, and he did a lot of that. Like I said, the in the article, 4 interceptions on throws of 10 yards or less. Those are those things that he did too much at Auburn. So, be interesting to see how he responds not having Kenny Dillingham this year, but I mean, that's the case for him at 4.
I would actually state the case that his production could actually be better this year as a passer than it was last year.
Right.
With it's Will Stein is the name of the guy, right? I mean, you look at the numbers he put up with Frank Harris at UTSA last year. I mean, he's going to fit into that very well. I wouldn't have Bo Nix there. I think the numbers were good. The 43 touchdowns is good. I would argue Sam Hartman had 50 2 years ago, but that's a different conversation. We'll get to that part here in a little bit. J.J. McCarthy 5. I think that's probably the one that a lot of people are going to have the biggest problem with. Or is that a pure projection thing for you? What's your reasoning for having J.J. McCarthy at the number 5 spot?
Right. He got that. He played big when they needed him to play big. He beat Ohio State. for the first time since 2000 at Ohio Stadium. That hadn't happened since Drew Henson. I pointed that out for years. I mean, 12-1 as the starter. I think people are waiting to, depending on who you ask, he's a day 3 quarterback or a first-round quarterback. And I think the talent, first-round quarterback talent is there. And if he cleans up the vertical passing stuff with the receivers he has, it'll be very interesting. But I do like J.J. McCarthy's high-end potential at Michigan. And like you said, he nearly brought them back against TCU, and I think he'll learn from the mistakes he made.
Another one that you have that I thought is very interesting, Bill, and we'll get into this one first before we get into Sam Hartman discussion, is a guy that you have in your top 10 that I think is probably the most polarizing quarterback to discuss in college football right now, and that's Quinn Ewers at Texas. You had him at number 9. It's interesting that you went there, Bill. I don't know that I would put him at number 9. I'm sort of more of a I need to see it first type of thing. But I feel I've made this case before on this channel, Bill. I think Quinn Ewers has gone from incredibly overrated to underrated.
Right.
Because the expectations were so high. People forget last year really should have been his freshman year. I mean, he graduated early so he could get an NIL deal and go sit the bench at Ohio State for a year. I don't like that. I don't approve of it. But the fact is he lost a year of development. Goes to Texas and has an okay freshman year. Freshman year, in my opinion. And so now it's like he went from being this guy that 247 made the absurd claim of he is the best quarterback prospect ever, which was absurd, to now it's like people are like, well, who's going to beat him out first, Malik Murphy or Arch Manning? And that's just kind of what the perception is. You ended up ranking him 9th, Bill, and I think that's a very bold take. But it's one that I don't necessarily have a problem. Again, I need to see it more, but I don't actually have as much of a problem with this one because I do think that the talent is there, the weapons are going to be there, and I think last year's experience is going to help. And I think there's something to be said for a kid that was hyped up that much to have a little bit of humility.
Yes.
And how does he respond to it?
I trust the talent. I trust the 5-star talent that he has. He looked very comfortable in the spring game. He's throwing to 2 NFL receivers and a first-round tight end. And he has a long arm. And, I mean, all you have to do is go back to the beginning of the Alabama game last year where he was just slinging it against them. So I think he definitely has the upside to be, again, a very wide range, probably an even higher upside than J.J. McCarthy in terms of a first-round NFL quarterback because of that arm talent. But can he control the mistakes? He did not, though. Downside on Quinn, did not play well in games against ranked opponents. Did not play well against TCU. Played good against Oklahoma, but Oklahoma was a mess at that point. Yeah. So that's why Texas, like I said, there's a lot of upside with him. And I honestly think bringing on Arch is a good push for him in a lot of ways.
Well, and I think Malik Murphy having a very good offseason helps as well. If I'm him, I'm more worried about Malik Murphy than I am Arch Manning at this point in time.
Murphy had a great spring game. You're right.
Yes.
He played very well.
I do think he played well against Kansas State. I know his numbers don't light the world on fire, but I thought he made some really clutch throws in that win. And I thought he played pretty well against Washington. I mean, his numbers were tremendous, and he should have been over 400 yards if Xavier Worthy doesn't drop a deep ball. That should have gone for a big play. But I also look at and say he was really bad against Oklahoma State, really bad against Oklahoma State, and he was really bad against TCU. So I understand. My whole thing is, Bill, is I wouldn't put him in the top 10 in the preseason, but if you were to say my top 10 is projecting how this is going to end, I'd probably have him in my top 10 because I trust Sark. The talent around him is good, and I think that he is going to be a better player this year than he was last year. I really do. I really do.
Oh, for sure. And I think, that's something why Texas and Notre Dame, who are chronic hype teams, so to speak, in a lot of ways, people, I shudder at the Texas is back thing, and our social media team likes to have fun with it just because I shudder with the Notre Dame. There's one of my least favorite phrases is Texas is irrelevant. Well, no, they're not. Stupid. Because they're on and people watch and millions of dollars. Notre Dame's irrelevant. No, no, they certainly aren't. And Michigan.
There's a difference, Bill, between irrelevant and not good.
Right.
Notre Dame has not been great for a long time, but they're still very relevant. The fact that you're even having this conversation is because they're relevant.
Right. And Michigan's the other one. It's like Michigan's irrelevant. Well, no, because a lot of people watch them and so on and so on. So that's why it is interesting now that I'm looking at this again, that we have Hartman and Ewers back to back, because I think the upside on both is playoff. Texas could easily win the Big 12. Easily. And it's just a matter of going out and doing it. And your point about a top 5 roster versus a top 5 execution is well taken.
Notre Dame and Texas are the epitomes of that. Two teams with very good rosters, but they need to prove that those rosters can equal wins. Because I think still Steve Sarkisian has a lot to prove as a head coach. He was a great coordinator, but he's got a lot to prove as a head coach still, as does Marcus Freeman, because Marcus Freeman's for completely different reasons. His is just, we don't know, but Steve Sarkisian's never been a guy that's really led a team to great success, and he's got to prove that he can do that as a head coach. We've seen him do it as an OC, as a quarterback's coach. Obviously, he's got rings, right? I mean, he's got multiple national title rings as a position coach at USC, and then obviously as a coordinator at Alabama. But he's got to prove he can do it as a head coach, and so we'll see if Texas is sort of quote unquote back this year or not. So, yeah, we'll see how that pans out. Here, let's get to the Sam Hartman stuff, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Sam Hartman's number 10. I'll give you the first chance to kind of explain why you have him number 10.
I mean, obviously big numbers in the ACC, record-setting career, elevated Wake Forest. Started in 45 games, which is wild to me that we have a quarterback that's going to get near 60 starts by the end of the year. And he didn't. The stunning stat that I put in there, 41 picks on 944 attempts. So you and I kind of had a back and forth in text. Not having him over Cam Rising, which is a fair point. But, I'm like, Cam Rising's played in 2 Rose Bowls. And Cam Rising has he's got a style that I like. I'm partial to those guys, the guys that have done everything they can for their program. I go back to Cam Rising, the USC games last year, both of them. Not just one, both of them, that he elevated that team. And he played well in the Rose Bowls before he got hurt.
Until he got hurt, right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so here's a couple things. Number one is you said he elevated the team. I mean, who do you think has a better roster, Utah or Wake Forest?
Well, don't make me answer that. We already know the answer. But that's I would say Wake Forest receivers and Utah receivers are probably comparable.
Well, but he had what many people felt was the best tight end in college football last year. I think it's absurd, but he definitely had the number 2 tight end in college football last year. That's kind of my thing is you say, he elevated the team around him, and I think there's some truth to that. You say, we're talking about ripping up USC. He did that twice. USC's defense was terrible last year, so it's not like he went out there and ripped up a good defense. And you look at like what Sam Hartman did to Clemson, for example, I would say is very similar. What's the difference? Utah has a much better defense than Wake Forest does. Did he play any worse against Clemson when he went 20 of 29 for 337 yards and 6 touchdowns than what Cameron Rising did against USC? Well, what was the difference? Well, Wake Forest couldn't stop Clemson because their defense is terrible. In 2 games against in the last 3 years, Wake Forest has scored 34 points, and Hartman had 320 yards and 4 touchdowns against North Carolina. This year, he passed for 290 yards and 398 yards and 5 touchdowns against Carolina. The previous year scored 55 points. And then the year before that, they scored 53 points against North Carolina. He had 429 yards and 4 touchdowns. Right. They lost every single one of those games. Right. Yeah, and so it's kind of like you put Hartman on on Utah, or what's the conversation we're having? So that was kind of my thing is you say, Utah the last 2 years has won 20 games. Well, Wake Forest has won 19 the last 2 years. Right. ACC versus Pac-12, there's not a whole lot of difference there for me. You talk about what he did in the bowl games last 2 years. I thought he was really good against Ohio State, but that was a terrible Ohio State defense, as you and I both know. And so production-wise, it's not even close. Wins as a starter, it's 20 versus 18. Now, Sam Hartman technically had 18 of those 19 wins because he missed the Army game because he was coming back from that heart thing that he had last year. He'd have got that. But 18 versus 20. And Sam Hart, actually, I think Cameron Rising actually only had 19 of those 20 wins they had because he didn't start the season in 2021 as the starter. I don't believe he came off the bench, but they were 1-2 with him not starting, and then he comes in and starts against Washington State, and that starts their run of dominance in the Pac-12. But you look at the production, Bill, and the last 2 years, Cameron Rising's had 3 total games of 300 yards passing or more.
Right.
Sam Hartman's had 15 the last 2 years.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, production-wise, it's not even close. Touchdown-wise, which is the case you made earlier for Bo Nix, it's not even close. Wins, it's very close.
Close.
Now,
and,
one guy has
5-1 against ranked teams.
Sure, but that's a lot. That's like saying John Elway's not good because he went 0-3 in Super Bowls. Well, name me the team that he played where his team was on the same level of the team that he played against, right? I mean, that's the conversation. That's more of a team thing for me.
Right.
But that would be my case. Is there's really nothing about that has me screaming, "Hey, he's better. He played on a better team."
Right.
And he's gritty. I'll say this about Cameron Rising. He's a tough kid. And I have a feeling in Ohio, Midwestern,
we like those
Ohio
guys.
Kind of likes that guy.
Well, yeah, that's
he's the kind of guy that Michigan and Ohio State had for years.
We like those guys. So I mean, it's not like a huge gap. So like the gap between Rising to Hartman to as you get down the list, then Hartman's not a cutoff point. I think the next guy, somebody in the comments asked about Spencer Rattler. He's 11. He's been. I had him at number 1 on this list 2 years ago. So it's certainly been a journey for him. But I mean, second half of season, Spencer Rattler was really good last year.
Yeah. I kind of feel like for me, there's got to be a level of consistency to this conversation. Not the conversation, not that you're not being consistent, but the quarterback. There's got to be consistency in the conversation about a quarterback, and I think that's the thing that's so maddening about Spencer Rattler and why, to me, he doesn't belong in the conversation with Sam Hartman is because he'll show the flashes. If Spencer Rattler was some 3-star quarterback coming out of high school that nobody ever heard of, he's never getting the rankings that he's gotten.
Right.
It's all been built on what we thought he was going to be as a player, and he was solid in his year as a starter at Oklahoma. I mean, he was solid that 1 year, but he doesn't play well in great games. But you're talking about a guy that put up some monster numbers at the end of the year. He had 8 touchdowns and 2 picks in the last 2 games, but he only finished with 18-12. So how bad was he in all the other games? That's kind of the rub, So if you take those 8 touchdowns and 2 picks out, and the other 11 they played 13 games. So the other 11 games he was 10-10, right? I mean, and that's the thing that you look at. So to me, when you look at Sam Hartman, compare him to like a Jaden Daniels, for example, who you have ahead of him. When you compare him to Cameron Rising, who you have above him. When you compare him to J.J. McCarthy, the production isn't even close. Some of those guys just play on better teams, right? Does J.J. McCarthy lead Michigan to 19 wins or lead Wake Forest to 19 wins the last 2 years? I don't think so. Does he lead them to 8 wins this past year? I don't think so. And that would be kind of my conversation. And the other one, too, is the Jordan Travis one is interesting because I actually have Jordan Travis a little higher than you, but we see him exactly the same way. It's a nitpick of 5 to 7. I have him 5, you have him 7. That's no difference. Hartman is, compared to Travis, is where this conversation goes to me because production for Hartman's been better, more yards per game, more total touchdowns. And he's 2-0 against Jordan Travis.
Right.
And I would argue one of those years, I actually think Sam Hartman had the better team. Wake Forest was a better team than Florida State, had more talent than Florida State in 2021, in my opinion. They had the guys on that defense in 2021 and offensive line that were really good football players, plus the receivers. 2022, I don't believe that they had the better team, but yet Sam Hartman went to Florida State and led them to a 10-point win in a game that they were dominating most of that game. And then Jordan Travis did some stuff in the second half to kind of get it somewhat back in. And then once they got it to a touchdown, Sam Hartman led them right down the field for a game-clinching field goal drive. So that's the reason I personally had Sam Hartman at 4 ahead of Jordan Travis, because my ranking too, Bill, was projecting where they are now, or was not projecting. It was where they are now, of what we know of these guys.
Yeah, and I'm projecting forward with Travis.
Different conversation.
Definitely projecting forward with Jordan Travis a little bit. Like when I looked at his stats, it's good to know that he led returning Power 5 quarterbacks in yards per attempt. Mm-hmm. So it's not like he's throwing like bubble screens. He throws it down the field. And then the added dimension of him being able to, he's probably one of the most dynamic running quarterbacks in the game this year. I mean, you go back and look at the Florida game, he was amazing. So I like his potential pushing forward. I'm starting to like Florida State a little bit more with each passing day. And I know it's May. We'll see how I feel in August, but certainly a quarterback that could definitely make that run.
Well, I think the thing about Jordan Travis, too, if we're going to have a conversation about Jordan Travis irrelevant to where he should be ranked ahead or behind Sam Hartman, I think one thing that has to always be factored into it is some of the stuff he does can't be defined by yards. I mean, there's things he does that is going to impact the running back more, so they're going to have certain run concepts where you're going to see the running back running through this wide open hole, and you're like, why'd that happen? And you're like, because those two weak side defenders were chasing Jordan Travis on the read zone fake.
Right.
So he's going to have impact on those things beyond that. He's just one of those guys that you could watch play. This is what I love about Jordan. One out here for a second. Sorry about that. Can you guys all hear me?
I can. I lost you there for a minute.
Okay. Yeah, my I knocked my mic again. Here's the thing I like about him, though, is there's just some guys you can look at and say they put up numbers that don't necessarily knock your socks off, but watch like if you just look at the box score, he'll have some games where you just look at the numbers like, yeah, I mean, I'll have to watch the game, but that didn't really like blow me away. Those numbers didn't really blow me away. The Florida game, for example, he went 13 of 30 for 270 yards, and he rushed for 83 yards in a couple. Those are okay numbers, but then you watch the game.
Yeah,
like this guy had a huge impact on that game.
Right, huge.
And that's something I like about Jordan Travis. That I think sometimes you can do yourself a disservice with him by only looking at the numbers. You have to watch him play to really appreciate the kind of player that he is. I will make that case for Jordan Travis, which is why I have him in my top 5, to be honest with you.
Right.
And I think he's more. I mean, his production is better than Jaden Daniels, in my opinion. He beat Jaden Daniels in a head-to-head, and to me, he's that's why I would have him ahead of Jaden Daniels. And of course, I would definitely have Sam Hartman ahead of Jaden Daniels. Just right. I don't know what would your case be for having Jordan Daniels ahead of Sam Hartman?
Well, I mean, Daniels, look at what they did. I mean, the Alabama game.
Sure.
That's a pretty good one. I think the way that he developed over the course of the season and projecting forward a little bit with him. And he's the SEC quarterback with the highest Heisman odds. I like that he completes that. Again, I'm a stickler for accuracy in general. Maybe I have typos in my articles, but 70% completion percentage in 8 or more games.
Well, I blame Bill for that. That's what the editor should be doing.
Yeah. I mean, and as the season got on, he was just better and better. I mean, obviously he ran into that Georgia team and it didn't go his way, but I mean, difference maker. And that's what makes the Jordan Travis, Jaden Daniels matchup in week 1 so enticing, because you have 2 top 10 quarterbacks, and Daniels in particular, he's had another not as consistent as Sam Hartman over the course of his career. I mean, he had some very lows at Arizona State, but I think he fits with LSU, what they want to do. And he showed that in the back half of the season.
So when you talk about the Bama, are you just talking about leading Bama to a win or leading LSU to a win? Is that kind of the point of it? Or because I thought he played okay against Alabama. I didn't think
he plays when
great.
They needed him, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he did. I mean, you look at he caused them problems as when Saban runs into a quarterback that can improv and run a little bit. That's when Alabama runs in. That's been going on since forever with him.
I mean, that goes back to Johnny Manziel in 2012, and then Bo Wallace in 13 and 14. Was it 13 and 14 or 14 and 15? It was Bo Wallace one year, and it was Chad Kelly another year. But same thing, guys that can run around and make plays off script. I guess kind of the way I look at it is, you say he played one of those games. He did. He wasn't very good against Tennessee, at least not early. It padded a lot of stats late. I thought there were some games where he wasn't as good last year, and every time somebody says, "Well, the guy did this against Bama," my response was, "Look what Sam Hartman did to Clemson."
Right,
and Clemson was pretty good defense last year, and he destroyed them. I mean, just absolutely ripped them up. And so that's just kind of my thing. Is I just feel like it has to do with where he was. And I think sometimes that's where these rankings can be impacted by the school the guy plays for more than the actual play of the quarterback.
But I don't look like one individual game result isn't the end all be all for me. Like I could fire back and say, look what Sam Hartman did against Louisville.
Sure.
And that doesn't matter as much to me. I mean, like you got destroyed by Louisville, so he's not as good as Jaden Daniels. So I don't fall into that. And the Tennessee game, LSU got blown out because they just didn't stop them at all.
Sure.
That game was, I mean,
they weren't moving the ball incredibly well either. I mean, a lot of those numbers he put up, I think he had 300 yards that game, but a lot of that was late.
Right.
But that's my whole point, though. His team didn't play well that game.
Right. So
that's my thing.
Is it Jaden Daniels, Jordan Travis, Quinn Ewers, Cam Rising, and Sam Hartman? And like I said, that's probably the cutoff point. All 5 of those guys are going to have an opportunity to pull their team into the college football platform and maybe, just maybe, settle this debate for us. That would be
so much fun. If we could actually see more of these teams play each other. That's what when I look at some of these non-conference schedules, I won't hammer you for Michigan's non-conference schedule today. We'll have that one another day. But that's the one thing I do. That's why I'm very much looking forward to some of these September games, because we're going to see Jordan Travis and Jaden Daniels go toe-to-toe in Orlando. So who's in position to – because I think the rosters are somewhat equal. One team has strengths over the other in some areas, and the other one has advantages in others, and those type of things. We're going to see some of this get decided on the field. Is Jaden Daniels going to be able to take that leap this year? Because he's another guy that since his freshman year, we're like, this is the year that Jaden Daniels takes the jump. And to a degree last year I thought that he did. I just, again, go down to production. Wasn't even close. I mean, the overall production wasn't close. And, this is the thing is Jaden Daniels went 8 of 15 for 86 yards, 0 touchdowns, and a pick against Arkansas. And he rushed for 10 yards on 19 carries, and they won.
Right.
That's the difference to me. Part of the reason you're going to have some Louisvilles with Sam Hartman is because he has to play great for them to have a chance to win. He can't not play well and Wake Forest beat people. And I pointed out what they did against Carolina. He's led them to over 50 points twice against Carolina, led them to a 34 another year, and they lost all 3 of those games. And I think that's the thing for me that I get down to is it's those, what would this guy do on that team compared to what this guy has done on that team? And that's where, because you say, well, this guy beat that team. Well, I don't care who you had at quarterback. Wake Forest isn't beating Alabama. You give them Caleb Williams and they're not beating Alabama. You know what I mean? Right. And that's kind of where I say, well, I don't know. It's how did these guys play consistently? So that's where I come down to. But I do think this is going to have a chance to be a very good quarterback year in college football, because we've talked about these guys. But here's who we're not talking about. We're not talking about Devin Leary, who I had as a borderline top 5 guy last year. We're not talking about Brennan Armstrong, who had tons of yards 2 years ago. We're not talking about DJ Uiagalelei at Oregon State, which I thought was a great decision by him to go play for Jonathan Smith at Oregon State. There's a lot of quarterbacks we're not talking about here, including Riley Leonard, who I'm very high on. We don't have time to bring him up, but he was going to be one that I was going to ask you why he's not higher. KJ Jefferson I'm a huge KJ. I mean, if I had to pick between KJ Jefferson and Jaden Daniels, with all due respect, I'm taking KJ Jefferson.
Well,
right? I'm a big KJ Jefferson guy.
We can talk. Okay, so when Bill and I did this list, the 2 quarterbacks where we probably had the biggest disparity, Bill liked Riley Leonard, likes the numbers, likes the things that he did for Duke and, the rushing stats. And I probably had Milton higher because Milton's the other one. Milton's kind of the ultimate boomer bust pick on this list.
Sure.
If he booms, Tennessee's going to go to the playoff.
Yeah.
If he busts, it's going to look, it'll
Nico's the starting quarterback by game 5.
Correct.
Yeah.
Like when you have a freshman behind him that could start, or he could be Anthony Richardson this year.
Right.
In the NFL draft next year. So I like Milton's upside. I like how he played in the bowl game, but I also know, I go back to that Georgia game where Georgia can make anybody look very average very quickly, including Hendon Hooker. Sure. So those were the 2 we probably talked about most. The ones
it's interesting real quick on Joe Milton, because you talk so much about completion percentage, but he's one of the lowest completion percentage guys on your list.
In the most completion percentage quarterback friendly offense. And he did play well in the Orange Bowl. So if that's the Joe Milton we're getting, I'm going to trust it. I mean, Heupel's offense is real. Now, to your point,
is great. I mean, the offense is great.
And even without Tillman and Hyatt, I think it can happen. We'll see, though, right? So that's
because he didn't have those guys in the bowl game. I mean, that's the thing. If we're going to be fair, he didn't have those guys in the bowl game. But if you he had a couple big plays late, but a lot of that stuff was short stuff, which is stuff he had struggled with in the past. But he is 11 of 21 against Vanderbilt. That's my big thing is this is the ultimate test for me with Josh Heupel as a quarterback developer. If he can get Joe Milton into being a 62, because here's the thing, he doesn't have to complete 69% of his passes like Hendon did.
Right.
He just needs to produce like 62, 63 at the most, and he'll be effective because he can do some of those other things well, like running. It's a big, strong kid, bazooka for an arm. He can, throw the ball down the field. So it's going to be, can you get him to be more, and that's the same thing. That's going to be the challenge for Penn State this year with Drew Aller. Can you get him to hit the layups? Right. That's going to be the question mark. If Penn State's going to be the team that challenges for the Big Ten, it's because Drew Aller isn't making the big armed throws, the 60-yard bombs. It's Can he hit that 3rd and 4, with rhythm and get it out where it needs to get with good ball placement, good timing. And those are going to be the things that are going to determine whether some of these teams like Ohio State and Penn State can not just put up numbers, but win the money games. Those are going to be the things. And that's going to be the same thing to me for Joe Milton this year.
Well, and so one of your commenters said, it's a projection list, not a rankings. Yes and no. I mean, of course we project forward, but, some of these guys have street cred, so to speak. So, I mean, Milton, we're projecting forward. There was a time on this list where, and Kyle McCord is ranked, because if you don't rank Ohio State's quarterback, you're an idiot. Like, he's going to produce. There was one year we did this list, Brian. We put, I think I put Tagovailoa and Hurts.
Oh,
just to cover myself.
Right.
Like, well, one of them's going to play, and like the other one's good too. So,
but you had McCord at 23, so it's not like you had him like 9. That would be where I think people could have a complaint, is if you put him in the top 10 just because. And that was my beef with the ESPN list, having whoever the Alabama quarterback was going to be over Sam Hartman. It's just, well, it's whoever it's going to be is going to be X. And it's like, well, you don't know that. But I think, to your point, I'll be surprised if Kyle McCord's not in the top 25 if he plays the whole year. The question is going to be for Ohio State is, can he play like a top 10 quarterback, which is what they need if they're going to go compete for a championship, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's the question mark.
You could do it with Lincoln Riley quarterbacks and probably be right. You'd been right the last 4 times. So he's one that, and again, we project a little bit. And then for me, it's like, I like Dylan Gabriel a little more. I like Jalen Daniels. I really like Jalen Daniels. There's one I do like. The Kansas kid, they were off to a 5-0 start, doesn't throw picks, accurate, runs the ball, lifts that program up. Just got hurt. Their backup was pretty good. But, we'll project a little bit forward on him. And then I'm kind of just scanning who else.
Riley's one that I would have had, because a lot of the things that you said earlier about other guys that you like, I think is very true for Riley Leonard. Talk about making a team better. You're talking about a guy that, completed 64% of his passes, threw for almost 3,000 yards, had 699 rushing yards, had 33 total touchdowns, and took a team that was, I think, 3-9 the year before and led them to 9 wins.
Right.
And so I think I would have had him a little higher. I would have had him ahead of Gabriel, a couple of those other guys, but it's also year 1, and you've got to see what he can do in year 2. I do like the talent around him too at Duke. He's got some good guys to throw the ball to as well.
He does, and we maybe, because I have a sense of humor, put the Kentucky and Duke kid back to back. With Riley Leonard being there, and then Liam Cohen coming back to Kentucky will make a difference for Devin Leary. I mean, that's the other guessing game. Like, are we getting the 35-5 Devin Leary, or are we getting the inconsistent injured Devin Leary who checks out if they start losing?
Which is what we saw last year.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. And we'll see. But, I mean, putting that list together is fun. A couple things I wanted to mention, too, is I saw a comment, Drew Aller's a guy I'd take a shot on. Well, a couple of the guys that we didn't put on there that I was pushing for is like Aller was one. Connor Wigman, I'm going to just say it. I like, if Petrino and Fisher works out, and that's quote unquote if, he's going to have a monster year.
Bill, you don't have to convince me of that one. People here know I'm very high on Connor Wegman. And I've said if Jimbo Fisher lets Bobby Petrino maybe isn't someone I'm going to have a debate with you about, a great moral character as a human being, but there's no disputing his offensive mind and his offensive prowess. There's no debating that. If Jimbo lets him run that offense, I'm a big Connor Wegman fan. So you don't have to sell me on that one. I wouldn't put him in the top 25 right now simply because he played 4 games last year.
Yeah, I mean, and small sample.
But if you were to say this is a projection of what I think we will see at the end of the year, and you're going to have him on that, then I'm totally good. That's the thing with someone's like Drew Aller, some of these guys, Bill. It's like, tell me what your top 25 list is. Is it a here's the top 25 going into this season, or is it a top 25 of how I think we're going to view this by the time the season's over? Because there's some guys, Drew Aller does not belong in the top 25 if it's just about what we know now, right? And you can make that case with Kyle McCord, but if we're going to, because the difference with Kyle McCord is Kyle McCord comes from a system that has proven the quarterback's going to produce. Drew Aller doesn't. That's the difference in that one. And Kyle McCord's going to be throwing to Marvin Harrison and all we talked about. But if you're going to tell me, hey, what is your prediction of what the 25 is going to look like by the end of the year? Drew Aller is going to be on there. Kyle McCord's going to be on there. Connor Wegman would be on there for me. And that's the reality of it. So,
and we will
depends on where you are.
We update this one in the midseason, but nobody clicks on that one because they just like to say, I told you so, and you were wrong. And
we got nothing else to talk about right now, right?
All I'll say is last year, my top three I know the top two were Young and Stroud, so I'm not wrong there. Mm-hmm. And I know we had Hendon Hooker 3, I think. So at the time at midseason, I was fine.
Well, I mean, I would argue that he was there all season until he got hurt. I mean, that's I have no problem with that. Yeah. The way the season played out, I mean, there was a time where I would have argued that Drake May should have been 1 or 2, the way that he was playing. But by the end of the year, I mean, he didn't finish the way he played in the middle of the year. I mean, early in the year, he was okay. Late in the year, he was okay. Middle of the year, he was phenomenal. Now it's about, can he take that next step and be more consistent? Now, that doesn't mean to pass Drake May. I mean, Caleb Williams, I don't think he's going to do that. But as far as just putting that Carolina team on his shoulders, because he did at times, but they just were outgunned. I don't care what he did against Notre Dame. They weren't going to win that game. They just were outmanned everywhere else but quarterback in that game. So that's going to be an interesting one to discuss. So we will have you back on, though, Bill. Actually, well, I mean, you're going to always be on. You actually did a show today on CFB Nation. So if you're not subscribed to the CFB Nation channel, folks, you need to do so. Go to subscribe on YouTube, but also subscribe to the podcast platform so you can get the show. You guys talked about this Big Ten TV deal. It's going to be interesting. I mean, is it up in the air? Is it just, it's going to eventually get finalized? There's so much to discuss here. How does that impact Notre Dame? It's something I'm curious about. So you guys will have that. You recorded that show today. I'll have that ready for everybody tomorrow morning. So you'll be able to check that out tomorrow morning. I may get the video up when I watch it. If I may be so intrigued that I just want to get the video up on the CFB Nation YouTube channel tonight. But you guys had that. You guys can find all the Bill and Bill do a show every week on CFB Nation, and they talk about all types of different topics. And I love what I love about Bill is you will answer for the things that you say. You don't just make a ranking and then hide from it. And I always respect that. And how many people come back and say, you know what, Bill, you were right. I was wrong. I'm sure you don't get nearly as many of those tweets.
Everyone, I tell you, I don't get it coaching from parents. But so I'll give you a little spoiler on that one. And I would be curious. So here was I'm going to let you in a little bit of the snippet of this podcast. So we were talking about, give it to your listeners, give it to you. I'm going to just ask you straight up. I told Bill, I was like, this thing about the primetime games. I was like, I hate primetime games. I've always hated them. He's like, why are they giving a pushback from Big Ten schools? I was like, because we don't like them. Nobody likes sitting out in those places in November. And I said, what is your ideal game time for Notre Dame? Mine's still noon. Mine's still noon.
Well, mine is for Notre Dame. It's still the 2:30, 3:30 games. That's just what they've always done. I mean, but it's an afternoon game. I mean, to me, primetime games are for early in the year and against a big rival. I mean, I think Notre Dame's first primetime night game was, I think, 88 against Michigan, right?
Yeah.
And Michigan's first night game was 2011
against Notre Dame. Yep.
So there is no. I mean, I've never watched Ohio. I grew up watching Ohio State and Michigan because Notre Dame would always play that night, usually play that night or later the afternoon, and 3:30 game or whatever against USC. But I didn't grow up watching Notre Dame and USC play at night. I grew up watching them play right after the Ohio State Michigan game when it was out in LA, which was always at noon. I mean, that's the tradition of it.
Yeah, and I said I'm going to go to practice tonight. My kids' practices. I said I'm going to go find 20 dads, and in this part of Ohio, there'll be a mix of Notre Dame, Ohio, maybe a couple sore thumb Michigans, and I'm going to say, "What's your favorite game time?" And I guarantee you. I told Bill in the bet, I said there'll be less than 3 to 4 that say 8 o'clock.
Sure.
We don't like that.
I like one a year is really where I'm at. One or
they
two
should
a
be
year.
Special occasions.
Right.
Special occasions, not November 21st or whatever it is. Michigan State, Ohio State. I was like, of course they're not going to like that because they, Notre Dame, they're starting to plan their calendar. Ohio State and Michigan are starting to plan their calendar around each other. So it'll
Whereas
be
Notre Dame fans can look and say, they can look at the schedule and say, I know Ohio State and I know that USC are going to be night games because that USC game now is always a night game at home. And they always have that early season, late September, early October prime matchup that's at night too. Okay.
Yep.
Georgia was at night, Stanford's at night, USC's at night when they're at home. I mean, so you can plan around it, right? But I'm with you. I personally, as a coach, I always preferred noon games because I liked as a coach to be able to get up, not have to worry about our players doing anything else. We get up, we go to breakfast, we go to our team meetings, we get to the locker room, we get our stretch, we get our treatment, and then we're ready to go play a game. As an analyst, I kind of like the 3:30 games, to be honest with you, because I can watch some of the noon games and then I can watch the PM games and that type of thing. But I don't love a bunch of night games. And that's one thing I hate about Notre Dame schedules because like every road game now, almost every road game they play is a night game. It's like Purdue's a night game, Navy's a night game, Georgia Tech's a night game. It's just like you get sick of it because it's Notre Dame and it's prime time. For an irrelevant team, they sure do get put on ESPN and ABC at 8:00 against a lot of irrelevant teams. You know what I mean? Like I had to watch Notre Dame play Syracuse in 2014 at freaking night. You know what I mean? It's like, why? Because
that's what they were saying last year. And that's what I was talking to Bill about. I said, Ohio State fans, they didn't want to drive up to the shoe and watch them play Toledo last year at night. Michigan fans don't want to watch Michigan and Hawaii at the big house at night. And we're creatures of tradition. And then Bill's a, Vanderbilt grad and that. I just said,
so you're saying he doesn't understand football tradition? Is that what you're saying?
I said he doesn't understand the Big Ten mindset. And I said, and I can lump Notre Dame in there because it's the same thing. It's like, I'm not going to change my mind because the network is telling me to like this. I still don't like it. And, like Notre Dame, when I thought about Notre Dame and Michigan playing over the years, they had 3:30 game. Yeah. Should be 3:30. That was the best spot for that game because it was in the primetime window or the middle window. And that's what I associated Notre Dame Michigan games with was 3:30. Right. And even Ohio State Michigan back in the 1990s, when did they play? They played at 3:30.
I think for me, my only pushback, and this has nothing I agree with everything you're saying. I have a hard time, like the Big Ten's thing was the tradition. And I'm like, says the conference who just went and poached USC and UCLA from the Pac-12.
Well,
can your conference name is the Big Ten and you have 14 teams. So don't come at me with the whole tradition thing when you're the Big Ten conference. For you, for analysts, for fans, I'm cool with that because I think that there's a level of you can agree with that. But it's just kind of like that's the line you're going to draw in the sand on tradition. Is when you're going to kick off games, not we're going to bring two teams from California into the Big Ten, which is a traditionally Midwestern, Northeastern conference. We're going to bring in two California teams, but we're going to be pissed off because we have to play some 8:00 games. You know what I mean? To make our $100 million a year. Like that's where they like, I agree with the premise of what you're saying, Bill. We're on the same page there, but it's just like, I have no sympathy for the conference that is playing as big of a role as the SEC and destroying all the traditions of college football. But they're going to draw the sand in the line for we want noon kickoff games. Like, okay, like I'm sorry, you've lost me.
I'll give you the corporate answer is we can, the Big Ten's, doing what it's best to do to promote the game of college football, bring it coast to coast. And, we welcome USC and UCLA with open arms. I see Archer's comments hilarious to me because it's like, Ohio State, Youngstown State might be a primetime game.
Well, Archer's an Ohio State fan. He's one of our resident. We have some fans from other teams in here. He's an Ohio State fan. So
I'll watch that game. Because there's a Pickerington kid that might be playing quarterback for Youngstown State. I'll watch at least a couple series.
Yeah, I just laugh when I hear them when the words tradition come out of the mouths of Big Ten fans. You know what I mean? So like, you're going to lose me on that. Although I agree with it. And that's what's frustrating because I agree with the premise of I'm tired of all the night games, especially like, I don't care about Iowa. And was it Penn State, Iowa is going to be a night game? Like I don't care about watching that game at 8:00 at night, but I just when the Big Ten does it, it just kind of falls on deaf ears a little bit for me. You know, the guy that negotiated this deal is the same guy that wanted to cancel their season 2 years ago. You know what I mean? So they're going to lose me a little bit with some of that kind of stuff. So that's my thing. Even though I would agree with you in theory, it's just I have a hard time saying, yeah, Big Ten, stand for tradition, except for when you're going to keep adding teams and doing this and poaching the Big 12 and poaching the Pac-12, and your league no longer really looks anything like what the Big Ten looked like when this tradition started. But sure, let's draw our line in the sand for noon kickoffs in November. Okay.
To me, it's creatures of habit. And I still think it's part of the reason why the Pac-12 has trouble getting eyeballs is because people on the East Coast aren't going to stay up at 10:30 at night and watch Washington State and Arizona State. Now I might, but others won't. So,
right. No, I'm with you. I get it. It's just the whole thing is just silly to me. Like that's where you guys draw your tradition line. Noon kickoffs.
I never said the line wasn't gray.
Again, I'm not talking about your stance. Your stance is fair. I'm talking about the Big Ten's hissy fit over kickoff times. It's like you're getting this amount of money and this is what you know what I mean? You're adding 2 California teams and this is what you're upset about. Okay, whatever you say. But it's going to be you guys are going to have to listen to it because I know Bill and Bill are going to get into this quite a lot more, and it's going to be a very, very fun conversation. So, Bill, thank you. So we're gonna do this again over the summer. We're going to have you on a few more times. I think you and I are probably going to do a couple CFB Nation shows together this summer as well. Maybe a couple live shows, maybe on CFB Nation. Well, that might be a little bit of fun. So we'll get that rocking and rolling. But hey, Bill, let everybody know before you get out of here where they can find you, where they can find your articles, and then of course where they can find you on socials.
Yeah, I knew we were gonna have some fun today, and I can take it, right? Like I assure your listeners, I'm one of those guys that can take it because when you
enjoy that,
you when you grow up in this, we like to say, I can argue, I can take it when I admit when I'm wrong. Not to Bill on the other podcast. You can check out our other podcast on CFB Nation. We're having a lot of fun with it. I'm at sportingnews.com. Privileged to call Brian a friend, somebody that we can go back and forth with. And we're going to get after it here. I'm going to get back. I got softballs on the schedule tonight, so I got to go make a softball lineup for the Pink Diamonds. We're going to go out and dominate like we normally do. So thanks so much for having me on. Thanks to your listeners. Check us out. It'll be a good time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for coming on with us.
I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks so much.
So we do have a couple shows here, or a couple questions here that we're going to get into. We're probably not going to have a super long mailbag because we don't have a ton of questions unless you guys want to get some more in there. But we do have a few. And look, before I get into that, folks, this is why you need to be on the CFB Nation channel. Bill does a great job. He's a lot like me in that he's very opinionated. I think he'll admit when he's wrong, but you better be pretty clear, make a pretty strong argument about it. Very fair though. And this is I can't remember, I think what game it was where I actually went up and first talked to him, but I had read some of his articles and I thought he's very fair and very objective. He's been, I don't agree with all of his takes on Notre Dame, but he's always very fair to Notre Dame. And I would even argue pro Notre Dame. I think he's one of those people that thinks it's good for the game when Notre Dame is good, because I think he likes the fact when Midwestern teams are good. So if you have not checked out Bill's work at Sporting News, please do so. He does a great job with his written content, but he also does a great job on the CFB Nation channel. And so we've had some meetings here about some things we're going to do to try to get more from them here over the summer and some different things that we got planned. And of course, doing more with us will be something. We'll have him on again this summer. There's no doubt about it. So hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. We've got a couple questions here that I'll get to before we get out of here, folks. Garen Knutson says, haven't contributed in a while, but IB always contributes. Thanks for what you all do. Go Irish. Thank you, Garen, very, very, very much for that. Rob Osgood says, guys, I would love to see a top 25 QB list like this, preseason after game 4, after game 8, and then another into the regular season, see how it changes. Now, I think Bill said this during his show. He does update his throughout the year. It's not like every week, but like periodically. I don't know if it's 4 games or half the season or whatever, but he does update it throughout the season, which is a good read. So I would check that out. And I don't know, I may do something like that this year. I'm not sure. I'm still thinking through one of the things I've been doing this week, which is why we haven't had as much written content at Irish Breakdown, is because this week's been a long week of trying to put together some different some different things in regard to what our summer schedule is going to be, we're making some changes to our podcast and what that's going to look like. So there's a lot of different things going on that are gonna result in some changes in the type of content that we're gonna have, where certain things are gonna be found. Some things we would always do in written articles. Now I'm gonna start doing more on the message board. Got a couple other things planned that I can't really get into just yet on this one, but that's kind of what we've been working on all week is really getting that stuff figured out and getting that stuff planned. So, that's an interesting idea, very interesting idea of something to discuss. And DJ Holman with a question. He says, because he's been committed for a while, dropping rank and the focus on Nelson and Riddell, some fans overlook question Jack Larson. Could you explain why he's still a good piece in the 2024 class? Yeah, DJ, there was somebody today on our message board that said something like Notre Dame should drop him from the class and try to take Jaden Riddell and Carter Nelson, and I just strongly oppose that. Number one, I think that Jack Larson is it's what you said though. If Jack Larson was a guy that like would have committed like at the blue gold game, there'd be a lot different opinion of him just because he's been in the class so long, and because of the rankings drop. Like look, here's the deal though. Number one, he should have never been the number 47 player in the country like 247 had him. He should have never been there, and he was ranked there as late as November. But my counter to that would be, but what in the world could you possibly use to justify having him go from number 47 overall nationally to a 3-star and the number 27 tight end? There's no justification for it. And I think that's the problem that I have is, there tends to like On3 did this with Sullivan Absher last year. They had Sullivan Absher way higher than he should have been. And they had him ranked in the 50s at one point in time. And then by the end of the year, he had a not very good all-star game experience, which we talked about because of the fact the kid's never been in pass pro before. And then On3 dropped them the 266, and I felt like it was a sort of an absurd overcorrection. And you should never drop a guy 200 spots because of what he did in an all-star game. If you had been consistent for over a year that he was something something different. So to me, it's like if they wanted to drop him to an unranked 4-star, I'd have him in the top 200, 250 for sure, but I wouldn't argue too much with that. But to have him go from number 47 player in the country to a 3-star, and he has played 0 football games in that stretch of time, just seems pretty absurd to me. And they lose credibility when things like that happen. But why is he still a good piece in the class? Number one, because he's a talented kid. He's a kid. He's got some of the best hands and ball skills in the entire country. And as much as I like Jaden Riddell and Carter Nelson, especially Carter Nelson from an upside standpoint, neither of them catch the ball like Jack Larson does. I mean, I've yet to see a tight end that has the ball skills that he has. I mean, it's tremendous. He's a quality athlete, and needs to work on his route running. He's got to get stronger and those type of things. And he's not going to be a guy that's going to be a great separator. But he's a good football player and a good pickup and a guy that brings value. Now, could you make a case for a second tight end? Sure, especially if you're not going to bring in a 4th receiver. That's fine. And if you think that Jaden Riddell and Carter Nelson are too talented, one of them, taking one of them is too talented to pass up, then sure. The other part of this is you got to remember why Notre Dame made the push for him. Number one, they liked this film quite a bit. But he came to Notre Dame and in a workout was with Christian Betancourt, who I saw somebody had as the best tight end in the country. I can't remember who it was. He completely outplayed him the entire day. He was the best quarterback there. Brady Priestcorn was at that camp. There were several kids ranked higher than Jack that Jack outplayed at the camp on top of having really good film. And that's what kind of was the final straw for Notre Dame of why they really made a strong push for him at the very end, because they think he's very talented. And I'm going to trust Notre Dame on this more than a 247 ranking, to be honest with you. And I always felt he was not a top 100 player when they had him as a top 100 player. But they've gone way too far in the opposite direction. I looked at this. You want to talk about just why I have zero respect for 247's rankings. Number one is I know who one of the people that's a driver of that is, and I have zero respect for him. But number two, you're going to tell me that this 16-man Notre Dame class only has 4 players that rank as 4 stars or higher and 12 3-stars? That's absurd. That's absolutely absurd. That's one of the people talk about bias. I don't know if it's an anti-Notre Dame bias. I have strong opinions that there is to it, but I can't prove it. But it's hard to look at those rankings, and I'm not talking about the composite rankings. I'm talking about their own individual rankings. You're going to tell me 12 of the 16 Notre Dame commits are 3-star players? Get out of here with that. Like, I don't even have time to fool with you at that point in time. I don't even have time to hear what you have to say. It's just absurd. People shouldn't respect your opinion, and people should stop looking at your rankings at that point in time. I mean, it really is bad. We have a super chat here from Cuba Puig. Thank you, Cuba. Appreciate that. Is there a world where Cole Mullins moves to linebacker if we get Logan Thomas and Elijah Rushing? That's a good question, because obviously the question comes from the standpoint of that Cole plays linebacker, a lot of linebacker in high school. I don't think he projects to that part, to that position at the next level, Cuba. I think when you look at him, he's 6'4", 240. He's not a guy that, to me, runs well enough in a modern defense to be a linebacker. I think the thing about Cole Mullins is, what I like about him is I think he can play Viper, no question, but I also think he's a guy that can play on the field end as well. And I believe, and I don't know this for a fact, but I believe, based on what we've seen from Notre Dame, how they're recruiting and how we saw them in the spring, that they're going to go to the field end is going to be not so much the big power player that it used to be, where they were kind of borderline having like 3 defensive tackles on the field. Like in 2021, Notre Dame basically had 3 defensive tackles on the field a lot of the time, because they had Myron Tagovailoa at field end. And that was also true this past season, and a lot of times the way that they use Riley Mills. And so I think they're going to more of a situation of, I think the field end has got to be a guy that's a bit more disruptive. And I think Cole Mullins could easily play that. So between those two guys, if those two guys are going to play Viper, then I have no problem moving Cole Mullins to the field end. And then, I could see Bryce Young maybe even outgrowing the field end position as well, and end up being a really athletic 3 technique. I could see that as well. So those are things that I look at. And somebody had brought up made a comment about Cedric Irvin. Here's the difference between Cedric Irvin and what's going on now in regard to dropping Cedric Irvin from the class, and not doing so with Jack Larson. Number one is the Notre Dame staff that's here now likes Jack Larson. They did not feel the same way about Cedric Irvin. I'm not a big fan of dropping kids out of a class. I didn't like what they did with Jack Nickel, to be honest with you. I understood it. I thought it was the right. They should have never taken his commitment in the first place. With Cedric Irvin, the difference is, as I said, that was a new staff, new running backs coach, new head coach, and they were honest with the kid. And the people that wanted Cedric was Brian Kelly and Lance Taylor were no longer here. And Coach McCullough, and I don't believe Coach Reese supported the decision to bring on Cedric Irvin. He did support the decision to not have him in the class, and they were honest with him. Look, you're not going to play here. And I always think you should be honest with a kid. If you don't think a kid could play for you, and he's a kid you kind of inherited, one of the discussions I'm going to have tomorrow, there's a lot of stuff about what Pat Narduzzi said about Deion Sanders and how he's building his Colorado team. That's going to be one of my rundown topics tomorrow, is going to be that, because, if you don't think a kid can play for you, you have the right to tell him that. And then he can kind of do what he's going to do with that. But why bring a kid to play for you when you don't think he can play for you and kind of waste his career? Let him find another home, as long as you're honest with him. So I think that's to me, a different situation. Now, that's not something I'm going to do if, like, you recruited a guy and he's been committed to you for, Jack Larson's going on to being almost a year since he committed to Notre Dame. And now all of a sudden you can find someone better, so you just kick him to the curb. No, I can't support that. I can't support that. I really can't. I can't go there with that one. And at the end of the day, the staff doesn't view it that way. They really like Jack Larson. That's the difference. Shamrock Sean says, what does Hartman have to accomplish during the season to win the Heisman? Also, is there a specific place fans can buy a Hartman jersey? I don't know about Hartman jersey. I don't know if the bookstore has them or not. I have not been to the bookstore in a very long time, so I couldn't tell you if they sell them or not. I don't, and I haven't looked anywhere online. So I'm sorry, Sean. I can't help you on that one. I haven't bought a jersey since I was like in high school. So I don't know where to find those. It's no judgment. I don't have an answer to that. What does he have to do to win a Heisman? Number one, he has to win the big games. They have to beat Ohio State. They have to beat USC. They have to beat Clemson. And I think he has to play really well in those games. And I think there's 2 things that he needs to do if he wants to win the Heisman. I even think that they could lose to Clemson, and as long as he plays well, he could win the Heisman. But he's got to do two things. He's got to beat. They've got to beat, and he's got to play well against Ohio State, and then they've got to beat, and he's got to play really well against USC. Because if you're gonna go out there, let's just say they play USC and they win, they beat USC in a similar fashion the way they beat Clemson last year. In that it's just running the ball, and Sam makes a couple nice plays and all that. But Caleb Williams is doing some Hercules stuff, and it just doesn't matter. Notre Dame's just a better team. I mean, you're still going to come away, wow, Caleb Williams is phenomenal. What's going to have to happen is he's going to have some really the money games have to happen in prime time. And we've talked about this with Heisman Trophy winners in the past. Is you could argue this other guy had better stats and this other guy was a better player, but dang it, this guy was money in the big games, and his team was really good, and so that's what they're going to give the Heisman to. So I think 11-1 or better, very good numbers. I mean, he doesn't have to put up like 4,500 yards. If Sam Hartman's at like 3,800 yards, I mean, honestly, I'll be real with you. If his numbers look like they did last year on a per game basis, I mean, if you look at what Sam Hartman did last year and say, because like he only played 12 games because he missed the opener, and then played in the bowl game, so he has a 12-game average. If in 12 games he has 3,700 yards passing, 38 touchdowns, and they're winning 11, 12 games, if he can just cut down on the interceptions just a little, where, maybe it's like 10 or 11, which is just, but avoid the really bad, the Louisville 3 touchdown or interception games, and Notre Dame beats Ohio State and USC and he puts up really good numbers, I mean, he's in the conversation. I mean, he's absolutely in the conversation. Because remember, the Heisman's I mean, it's basically going to go to somebody that plays for one of the best teams in the country more often than not, unless you have like a crazy Lamar Jackson type of season. Heisman more often than not goes to who's the best skill player on the best team, one of the best teams in the country, and that's just kind of what it is. So they're going to have to be one of the best teams, and he's going to have to play really well in the money games. And that's to me, that's how Sam Hartman can find himself in the Heisman conversation. Irish Fan 15, early prediction for LSU and Florida State. I don't necessarily have a prediction just yet, Irish Fan. I need to study both rosters, but I'm going to tell you, I really like Florida State going in this year. I'm going to, if I were to pick right now, I'd pick Florida State because I'm more familiar with their roster of what's coming back, to be completely honest with you. I also like their quarterback more. And I need to find out. I still have some questions about what LSU has coming back. Meaning like I'm not quite sure at a couple positions that have coming back, so I wouldn't be putting money on it, and I wouldn't do a show breaking down that matchup just yet because I haven't studied LSU enough. But I do like what I know they have coming back. I think their defense has got to get better, but so does Florida State's. Florida State's defense also has to get better, especially in some of the bigger games they had last year. So they both need to get better on defense. They both have dynamic run-throw quarterbacks. They both have good but not great offensive lines. They both have good but not great talent on defense top to bottom, from what I know, although both of them have some high-level players, but LSU has the best defensive player, in my opinion, of the two, although some would argue that Jared Verse is that guy. But it's a debate to have. They both have like that star guy, but then some question marks where you're not as strong. I think Florida State did better in the portal than LSU did, just in my opinion. But at the end of the day, I trust Jaden Daniels. I trust Jordan Travis a little bit more than Jaden Daniels on top of the game being in Florida. And honestly, Mike Norvell's had Brian Kelly's number. I mean, look, Mike Norvell's coached against Brian Kelly, twice? Because when they played Notre Dame, if you remember, when his first year at Florida State was 2020, Notre Dame beat Florida State that year. But if you remember, he did not coach in that game because he tested positive for COVID. So he wasn't at that game. It's one of their assistants was the head coach of that game. He was back home that game. And then they played Notre Dame in 2021 and took them to overtime and had a shot to win that game. And then, of course, they beat LSU last year with Brian Kelly. And they outplayed them early. LSU came back. Florida State's got a chance to put the game away, and they fumble it. LSU has a chance to win it. Special teams mistakes, shocker, cost them that game. But I think that's – and that's I mean, look, that's true. Bill Belichick, Mike Shanahan, for whatever number, just had Bill. I mean, for whatever reason, had Bill Belichick's number. Mike Shanahan as good of a coach as Bill Belichick? No. I mean, Mike Shanahan was a great coach, won 2 Super Bowls as a head coach, won a Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator, was a great coach, was in another Super Bowl with the Broncos as the offensive coordinator with Elway. But he's not Bill Belichick, but he always had really good success against them. That's just the reality of it. Some coaches are just that way. And I don't know. I can't explain it, but some coaches are just that way. Hugh Freeze had a lot of success against Nick Saban for when he was at Ole Miss, which is going to be really fascinating now that he's at Auburn. It's just that way though sometimes. So it's not a shot at Brian Kelly, but you just got to look at it and say it is what it is. Mike Norvell's teams play very well against Brian Kelly's teams in their 2 matchups. That's just the reality of it. And so we'll see how it pans out. Got a super chat here from Mark 1. He says, "Hi, great show. You guys are impressive." Thank you, Mark. Just a general question. What is your general thoughts on this Notre Dame team overall? I mean, for me, Mark, and I know this question was probably meant a little bit also for Bill as well, but Bill has them as a top 10 team. I think that's pretty good for a team that's coming off against losses to Marshall and Stanford last year and does have some question marks. They do have a lot to prove. I view them as I said it earlier, I'd have them 8 to 11. I think some things have got to go right for Notre Dame this year for them to win a title, but I think those things are capable of going right. I do think Notre Dame has a chance to be a championship caliber team. Right now, I'm still waiting for the guest to 100% confirm, but I'm going to have another guest on Thursday, and we're going to talk about what should expectations be for Notre Dame. So, Mark, we'll dive even more into that question on Thursday. What should we expect from Notre Dame this year? What should the floor be? And then what is the most that this team can do? Because what we're going to do is next week we're going to kick off sort of our new schedule, and we're going to start our season previews and just go down the line, previewing all types of different topics about this football team heading into the 2023 season. So this week is going to be some more of the bigger picture stuff of what should expectations be and that kind of thing. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I wanted to get an outsider's perspective today, and Bill gave that. On Thursday, if we're able to get this guest on, it's going to be more of a Notre Dame people's view of what this team should be. And obviously I'll have my strong opinions, and the person that we expect to have on will also have his strong opinions as well. And I think in a lot of ways we see it very similarly. So it won't be like a debate thing. It's just we're just going to talk about Notre Dame, and then next week we'll kick off our dive into this offseason and this season preview with a lot of the different stuff that we got going on. So, but thank you for that. And then we got this one from Jason. He says, "What is your floor ceiling for Notre Dame this year?" For me, the floor is winning every game, not Ohio State, SC, and Clemson. Ceiling is at least two or three of the top games. I think they could win all 3. To me, the floor cannot be 0-3 in those games, to me, because that means you've regressed as a team. Not only did you go 1-2 against those 3 teams last year, but 2 of those 3 games were on the road, and you had Ohio State in a situation where they had C.J. Stroud. So if you go 0-3 against them this year, and I don't care if your overall team record's still 9-3, that's a regression, because you were worse against the best teams in your schedule, not better, or not even the same. That would be a regression. To me, the floor for Notre Dame, just record-wise, is 10-2. Now, does that mean you go 2-3 against those opponents and then get upset by a Duke or a Louisville or an NC State? Possibly. Does it mean you go 1-2 against those teams and beat everybody else? Possibly. But to me, the floor for this football team should be 10-2. Anything worse than 10-2 is going to be a disappointment for me. It really is. There's too much talent on this team. There's too many question marks on other people's schedule on rosters as well. The schedule is very favorable for Notre Dame. It is challenging, yes, but the way that it's set up with the bye weeks where they are, NC State surrounded by 2, let's be honest, gimme games. USC and Ohio State's part of a tough stretch, but you have a bye week coming right after the USC game. Louisville and Duke are going to be tough games in between Ohio State and USC, but they're games you should still be able to win. And you get to your 2 toughest opponents at home. And then Clemson's going to be a tough team this year. They are. You're not going to just go down to Clemson and roll them the way that you did this past year. They're going to have they're going to want a lot of payback. That's going to be, in my opinion, a much more competitive game, and not even just because it's on the road. If they were going to come back to Notre Dame this year, I'd still say the same thing. That was a fluky game. You're not going out there the next 3 weeks in a row playing Clemson and running for 286 yards with no ability to throw the football and beat them by 21 the way that you did. It just that's not how football works. Just like if Notre Dame and Miami would have played a week later, I don't think Miami beats them 41-8. I don't think that's how it goes. So it's going to be a tough game, but you've got to go at least 1-2 against those teams, especially since 2 of them are at home. And so to me, that's the floor. The ceiling to me is a team that's playing the championship game. I mean, that's the ceiling. Am I saying – it's funny, I was having this conversation with Sean Davis before his show started, but we were having this conversation, and it's like, no, I'm not in a position where it's championship or bust for me, where if they don't win a championship, it's disappointing, it's you didn't do a good job, and I'm not there yet. I don't think this team is quite there yet. But that's what I think this team is capable of if it reaches its full potential, is getting to the playoff and winning a game. That's what I think this team is capable of. That's the ceiling for me. Then it comes down to, can they win a championship? It all depends on so many things. Who are you playing? I mean, you could have a team it's a great team, but who are you playing? Are you playing a team that's a horrible matchup for you? Or are you playing a team that's a good matchup for you? Or did you lose a couple key players in the semifinal game? There's so much that goes into that it's hard for me to say that, but that's just kind of what my expectation is for this football team as Notre Dame heads into the 2023 season. So that's going to do it for this show, everybody. Good questions. I think for me, I enjoyed having Bill on. Bill does a great job. He really is a good dude. If you don't get a chance to listen to his work, read his work, definitely do so. You can find him at Sporting News. You can find him on Twitter. Let me find his Twitter handle. I'll give that to you guys here real quick. His Twitter handle is @BillBender92. That's where you can find him. Go subscribe, check out his work. And of course, you can listen to him every week on CFB Nation. And you can check that out. Him and Bill Trocchi do a show. Like I said, I'll have their show up tomorrow morning. You'll be able to listen to it. They talked about the Big Ten and this TV deal, this whole drama going on with the Big Ten and the TV deal. They talk a lot about the Big Ten, but they talk about all types of other topics. And so you're definitely going to want to check that out as well. So subscribe to CFB Nation on the podcast platform. That's where you can get all the Lucky Lefty shows. So if you're someone that listens to Lucky Lefty show on a podcast platform, you're not going to be able to find that on Irish Breakdown here pretty soon. So you're going to want to go subscribe to the Lucky Lefty show or to CFB Nation, where you can then get all the Lucky Lefty shows. You can also get the Bills show, CFB Nation. We've got a couple other things in the work that we're going to try to get to this summer as well. So very much looking forward to expanding that content package and getting that rocking and rolling. So hit that like for our show, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message boards, people. I really appreciate, you guys signing up and support us, what we're doing. If you sign up for a monthly membership, you get a 10% discount to the merch store. You can get this shirt at the merch store and get that flag. There's lots of cool stuff you can get there. And if you are someone who subscribed for an annual membership, which is $49.99 a year, it's a great value. You get a 20% off discount to your next merch store purchase. If you sign up for the Shamrock, the Blue, or the Gold Club, you also get a 20% off discount to your merch store buys. But if you sign up for for Shamrock or Blue, you get a free IB Club mug. It says IB Club on it, and it only goes to IB Club members. It's not something that anyone else can buy. I don't have one. Vince doesn't have one. Ryan doesn't have one. Nobody else has one except for IB Club members. And if you sign up for the Gold Club, you not only get the mug, but then you get an IB Gold Club t-shirt that also is exclusive to IB Club members. So definitely take that out. And of course, when you do that, you're supporting us and you're helping us grow. I'm trying to make some moves this summer. I'm hoping to be able to go do some things with some hires. And the more support we get, the more I have in my sort of tool belt to be able to go out there and make those things happen. So we really appreciate that very, very much. So thanks, Bill, for coming on. We'll be 6:00 tonight. We'll have IB Nation Sports Talk tomorrow. I'll be doing a solo show. I'm going to do midweek rundown by myself tomorrow. That's going to be sort of the new format that we're going to have on the Wednesday show. I'll dive more into that tomorrow. And then tomorrow night, I'll be on with Sean Stiers. We're going to have a special recruiting show tomorrow night at 6:00. And we'll have a fun topic to discuss tomorrow night. So you definitely want to check that out as well. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. And we'll talk to you again soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.